right, we ready? Thank you. Good morning, everybody. This is the Rules Committee. We have attained a quorum with Councilwoman Sanchez, Councilman Taubenberger, Councilman Jones, Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, Councilman Jones, I said Councilman Jones, and Council President Clark. Ms. Marconi, will you please read the title of the bill before us today?
Bill number 170678, an ordinance amending Title 7 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Housing Code by adding a new chapter, 7-200, entitled Mixed Income Housing Program to provide for affordable housing standards, amending Section 14-702 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Mixed Income Housing to make related changes, amending Chapters 14-600 and 14-700 of the Philadelphia Code entitled respectively Use Regulations and Development Standards to amend certain zoning standards relating to residential development and making related amendments all under certain terms and conditions.
Thank you. And the record will also reflect Councilman Dom is present. You want to say something first? Okay, before we have any witnesses, Chair recognizes the sponsor of the bill. Also, please let the record reflect Councilman Heenan, member of the committee, is present. Chair recognizes sponsor of this bill, Councilwoman Quinones Sanchez.
Thank you, Chairman Greenlee, for allowing us to have a standalone hearing this morning. I want to take a moment and recognize everyone who's joined us in City Council here today to voice why Philadelphians deserve access to affordable, safe, warm, and healthy homes in every neighborhood in our city. I also want to take a moment to recognize the leadership of our Council President Darrell Clark, our Mayor Jim Kenney, in responding to our call to justice, that if we as a city want to invest in the growth of the private market housing, we do so for the benefit of all Philadelphians, not just those who can afford to buy luxury high-rise apartments in downtown Center City. Our shared vision, our roadmap for growth, is one where hardworking Philadelphia families from all walks of life have the opportunity to live affordably near their jobs, near good transit, and near good schools. Today we will hear simple math from local and national housing experts. Rising rents and stagnant wages over the past 15 years has cost our city to lose more than 23,000 affordable units. To that point, were the folks who kept you warm and safe on your commute this morning. Bus and transit drivers, security guards, laborers, childcare workers. These folks are now spending more than half of their every paycheck on housing at the expense of food, clothes, and medicine. The Pew reported poverty and housing segregation in Philadelphia has reached an all-time high, with 38% for Latinos and 31% for African Americans living side by side in poverty. If you picked up last week's Inquirer, you'd find the minimum wage employee will now have to work 128 hours a week to afford a two-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia at market rate. This is not the vision of Philadelphia City Council. We will not stand for this new trend of economic segregation and housing inequality like our neighbors of New York, Boston, or DC, where only the wealthiest city residents can afford to live near their jobs. The building industry calls this a jobs program, not a housing problem. A jobs problem, not a housing problem. That is wrong. To tell that hardworking SEIU member who are signing over entire paychecks to absentee landlords, tell that to the middle school teacher who pays higher tax bills to subsidize a 10-year tax property abatement on downtown condos they will never afford in 100 years. Tell that to their students of the School District of Philadelphia who can't see a nurse or a guidance counselor because we're abating school district taxes on the very same condos under the premise that their millionaire residents will provide trickle-down benefits someday. Affordable housing provides real benefits today. Affordable units empowers that Grace Ferry mother with the choice to send her child to Meredith Elementary. Housing Trust Fund resources empower our North Philadelphia family to fix a leaking roof without a water shutoff notice. Now the mixed income housing program will not alone cure affordable housing. It is one tool in an affordable housing toolkit to generate affordable units through public-private partnerships. but it is a critical one to preserve diversity and inclusion at a time of unprecedented need, a time when our federal and state government commits fewer public resources than ever to keep working families safe, warm, and healthy in their homes. I'm grateful to Council President Clark, who introduced this program 10 years ago, and I'm grateful to Ann Fadulin and the whole Department of Planning and Development, who helped us over the last few years to convene working groups of local organizations, national policy advisors, administration officials from planning, Office of Housing and Community Development, L&I, and Development Services, and business industry professionals, including architects, contractors, and lenders, who last year paid their way out, and PMC Realty, even PMC Realty, who last year paid its way out of a building permit agreement to set aside affordable housing units pursuant to our voluntary mixed income housing bonus program. In that aftermath, we learned a lot about how much more accessible, attractive, equitable, and mandatory our program needed to be. And so, at each and every stage of our working group process, we raised three simple questions. How can we support families in need? How can we empower the industry to build affordable? And how can we do so in a way that is accessible and enforceable? The result is Bill 170678, a mixed income housing program that leverages private market incentives to grow hundreds of units and millions of dollars in resources critical to keeping Philadelphia's families warm and healthy in their homes. Now, the hardest lesson I've learned in City Council is that we cannot legislate the perfect for everyone. But I am confident that our deliberate process to amend this legislation upon years of feedback has resulted in a simple, accessible, intuitive program that pairs our existing zoning bonus with a simple choice for developers of large projects to either build or preserve affordable units or pay the city to build and preserve affordable units. The program has two simple components, a density bonus and an affordability requirement. The density bonus already exists within our code under Title 14 of our zoning code. The mixed income housing bonus, as is known, was updated last year before this Rules Committee through the collaboration of our neighborhood civics, our committee chairman, Councilman Greenlee, from Ann Fadulin, all who testified on behalf of the Department of Planning and Development. The result was a density bonus for CMX 3, 4, and 5 zoning districts that this committee and this council approved unanimously. The same bonus that is being considered here today, except that we're adding RMX 3 and 4 given their similar dimensional standards. Let us be crystal clear. This bill, as amended, does not provide zoning bonuses for neighborhood development. That means no extra height and no extra density for RM1, RSA 5, CMX 2, and other low to mid-rise residential homes, whether designed for single-family or multifamily use. The other component of this program is requiring affordable housing within these core zoning districts. To establish simple, reasonable, affordable requirements, we met with HAPCO and the Apartment Association and examined the challenges to retrofitting existing buildings and renovations in excess of 7,000. We heard them and we amended the bill to only apply to new construction. We met with community development experts to establish need-based standards for affordable housing units, whether created by market rate developers or the Housing Trust Fund. We heard them and modified the standards to exclusively serve cost-burdened Philadelphia families. We met with the BIA, including architects and lenders who prefer defined, calculated options for compliance within zoning districts to best utilize density. We heard them and amended the bill that establishes the choice of building affordable homes within their own development or paying to the trust fund to build, repair, rehabilitate, and weatherize thousands of homes each year. Now, today you'll hear testimony from hardworking families that this bill doesn't go far enough, and I agree with them. You'll hear from builders that we need more density in neighborhoods, and you'll hear from neighborhood organizations that we need the opposite, less density and more parking. Again, that is why, as council members, we cannot legislate the perfect for everyone. That is why this program will not alone solve our affordable housing crisis. But I can tell you that this product of 10 years of deliberation, this program is uniquely and reasonably designed to leverage market rate development. It will create and preserve thousands of affordable homes for families in need. As neighborhoods change, as markets change, this council has always been committed to evolving the tools in our housing toolbox. Today marks a critical step of this city council, this administration, and the city of Philadelphia towards growing not a segregated city where only a wealthy few can afford to live downtown, but an open, diverse, and inclusive city where neighbors have the opportunity to live affordably, near good jobs, good transit, and good schools. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, I want to thank everyone who's participated over the course of the last 6 months of almost weekly meetings with many, many stakeholders.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you for all the efforts you've done on this very important issue. I know Councilwoman Rems-Brown would like to speak later. The record will reflect Councilwoman Bass, a member of the committee, is present. Ms. Marconi, will you please call the name of the first witness?
Ann Fedulin.
And while Ms. Fedulin is coming up, just a few ground rules, okay? First of all, I know people think they are whispering in here, but when 25 people whisper, it's not whispering anymore. So if you need to converse, please do it out in the hallway. And after Ms. Fedulin, we're going to call witnesses up in panels, and we're trying to balance it where there was some pro, con, that kind of thing. Each witness will have 3 minutes, no more than 3 minutes to speak, okay? Because we have over 30 people. So in fairness to the people who are 28, 29, and 30, and they won't be here till 8 o'clock tonight, okay? So everybody, and we'll have a clock to just, as a friendly reminder, that will go off after 3 minutes, which means you need to wrap up your testimony. And after each panel is completed their testimony, there'll be questions from the committee. So with all that, Ms. Fedulin, please identify yourself and proceed.
Thanks. Good morning, Councilman Greenlee, Councilwoman Sanchez, and members of the committee. I'm Ann Fedulin, Director of Planning and Development. I'm here to testify on Bill number 170678, introduced by Councilwoman Sanchez. The current bill, including amendments as proposed by the Councilwoman, would require developers of residential projects with 10 or more units to provide 10% of those units at either a rent or sales price affordable to moderate and low-income households. If the developer chooses not to build the units on site, they would need to pay a fee into the Housing Trust Fund roughly equivalent to the cost of building the actual unit. In order to offset the cost of building these units or making the payment into the Housing Trust Fund, the bill provides for varying density bonuses to allow the developer to build additional units by right. First and foremost, it must be stated that the need for affordable housing in Philadelphia is real, and that it is important for us to be having this discussion. The sponsor's goals of providing more affordable housing and promoting inclusive residential development are commendable. With a poverty rate of 25.7% and nearly half of those in deep poverty, too many households in Philadelphia find affordable, quality housing simply out of their reach. This is further evidenced by the 56.4% of households who were identified as rent-burdened in the Pew Report, Philadelphia 2017, the state of the city. While Philadelphia's housing market does not have the same pressures as those in the Bay Area or cities such as Boston, New York, or Washington, D.C., our relatively low median income, combined with our older and aging housing stock, equates to too many households living in substandard housing that they cannot afford to maintain. It is in this environment that all reasonable people will have to ask what can be done. The Councilwoman has proposed a set of amendments to the bill that would, roughly speaking, bring the legislation into line with the current mixed income zoning bonus program under Title 14. The bill would, however, make the program and bonus mandatory rather than voluntary. I commend the Councilwoman for working broadly with the administration and stakeholders to develop this framework and believe these amendments are a step in the right direction for the bill. Nevertheless, we believe the proposed amendments remain a working draft and not a final product. Crucially, the current income limits in the amendments do not appear to be economically feasible. The bill will also require adjustments to how density bonuses will apply in overlay districts. In moving forward, it will be critical for stakeholders, housing advocates, developers, community organizations, and others to provide the sponsor, her colleagues, planning and development, and the administration with candid input on how to refine this legislation and the implementation of the program it will create. Our shared goal must be balance and a fair deal for all. We must undertake further analysis to assure ourselves, stakeholders, and the public that the program's affordable housing obligations are sustainable and will provide for benefits that are both meaningful and attainable. We must also analyze the economic impact of the program and how it will alter development patterns. In speaking to the sponsor and to stakeholders, I believe that the balance can be struck. As the breadth of views that will be expressed in today's hearing will demonstrate, work remains to be done. In shaping the program that is best for Philadelphia, it will be necessary to consider how, over the course of fluctuation in the housing market, the program will affect affordable housing production, housing trust fund revenues, development patterns, and other issues. I would like to thank Councilwoman Sanchez for her dedication to the issue of affordable housing and for bringing this bill forward for a hearing. This discussion is critical to developing a strong, sustainable, affordable housing program that provides the security of a decent home to residents and families for whom it is currently out of reach. On behalf of the Department of Planning and Development and the administration, I look forward to continued engagement and to bringing a new program to fruition. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Fadulin. I just have one question, and I know you in your testimony mentioned about the program being mandatory, which I know is controversial with some people. Does the administration have an opinion on that yet, or is that something that you're still working out?
I think the program, I think the administration could be supportive of a mandatory program as long as it makes economic sense.
Okay, all right, thank you. If I could just request that please, if no one could yell out, it's just difficult to hear up here when someone does. Chair first recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, then Councilwoman Sanchez, then Councilman Jones.
Good morning, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you, for our context, speak to any other cities that have engaged in mixed income housing and done it successfully that we could look to as a possible model?
Well, I think it's really tricky to do that. I think there's a number of programs out there, but one of the key tenets of an inclusionary zoning program, if you will, is that it's very specific to what's going on in your local market. So what works well in other cities may not work as well in your local market because it's very dependent on what's going on in the local market. And it's hard sometimes to translate Philadelphia's market to what's going on in other cities because, you know, what makes Philly a little different is that we have very high construction costs and very low incomes, and that really kind of makes it unique, but we're also growing. So a lot of areas that you may see that have traditionally been considered kind of similar cities to Philadelphia, Baltimore, Cleveland, those kind of places don't necessarily have the same upward pressure on their market right now. But cities that have adopted inclusionary zoning, a lot of them on the West Coast, bigger cities, you know, Washington or DC, New York, Chicago, those kinds of places have a stronger market than we do and higher income levels. So it's really hard to take sort of a cookie cutter program and say this is what would apply to Philly. You really have to pay attention to the local market.
Have you had a chance to read yet the recent Pew study? The recent Pew study that looks at Philadelphia's status as...
I have looked at it. I'm hoping you won't test me on it, but I have looked at it. Yes.
That's fair. So on page 2 it says, for those in poverty, life can be filled with struggle. And the first metric, they say, is finding safe, decent housing. So philosophically, we know that you're on the same, we're on the same page. You believe we have a tale of two cities in Philadelphia?
I believe we're on that path. I think, you know, we do have, look at, when I speak to this issue a lot, right? And when I speak to this issue and people ask me this question, I say the truth of the matter is in Philadelphia, we need to attract every wealthy person we can get here who can buy a gajillion-dollar home and pay our taxes. We need that. We need that base. At the same time, we need to figure out and have programs that, you know, sustain the residents that already live here. And again, we have a very difficult marketplace because of our severe income issue and our poverty issue. But again, I think a lot of folks want to characterize the poverty issue as a jobs and education issue, but I think there's enough information and data out there that says unless you have a quality, safe place to live, it's very hard to get at those other issues, right? Because if you do not have a safe place to live, you are not worried about sending your kid to school, or there's not a place for your child to do the homework that they need to do. If you're worried about a place to live, you're not necessarily productive on your job. So I think all these things really go hand in hand.
My last and final question, what would be your recommendation for how we hold harmless those projects that are already in the pipeline?
So I believe the bill includes a delayed sort of inaction period, so I think it takes place, or goes into effect July 1, 2018. And so a couple things. One is, so anything that's already in the pipeline either has applied for a zoning permit or beyond that would not be affected. And then because this is a change in the zoning code predominantly, anything that applied for a zoning permit prior to the bill going into effect would not be affected by the legislation.
So you believe this is a change in the zoning code and not an overall of the zoning in the city of Philadelphia? Would you agree?
Well, so this amends Title 14.7 of the, which is the zoning code, which is part of the zoning code. It also gets to, so it amends two sections of the Philadelphia Code. One is the housing code.
Can you say that again so that that's clear?
Yeah. One is the housing code, and then the other is a section of the code that's is the zoning code. This really would come into play when somebody applied for a zoning permit. So yes, it's a change to the zoning code.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. The record will first please reflect Councilman Squilla, Vice Chair of the committee, is present, and Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you. And thank you for all of your time and energy as we work through this. Just want to quickly, if you can explain the two simple components of the program. I think there's a lot of confusion about how complicated this is, and you may want to put that in the context of what we've learned leading up to this point. You know, so explain the density bonus and the difference between the density bonus now and the voluntary one we have, and then the affordability requirement.
Right. So a couple things. One is essentially what the bill does in our reading of it is provides that for any project 10 or more units in certain zoning districts, CMX 3, 4, 5, or RM3, RM4, if you do a project of 10 or more units, 10% of those units have to be affordable at certain income levels. I believe for rental, it's 50, 60%, and then for home ownership, it gets down to 70%. So the difference right there from what is currently on the books that's voluntary is that the voluntary legislation does not affect the RM 3, 4 districts. It's only CMX 3, 4, and 5. And further, it's only CMX3 that where it's been designated as a TOD. Right, so that's a difference. The other difference is in the current voluntary program, there is affordability levels, which is considered moderate income, where the rental unit is at affordable to 80%, and the home ownership unit is at 100% of median. And then there is something considered low income, where the rental unit is affordable to somebody at 60% of median, and home ownership is 80%. So the income limits are slightly different in our current voluntary version than this mandatory version as well. And then the other difference is that the current voluntary version talks to a formula and a general basis for how the per unit fee would be calculated, whereas this bill lays out exactly what the fee would be.
Thank you. In terms of the fee, do you know, obviously we worked on this fee schedule together. What was your thinking around the numbers as amended?
Right, so based on the premise of the bill, which basically says if you don't do the units on site, the fee would be essentially equivalent to what it would cost to build the unit, anyway. Right, so what we did was we looked at various unit size ranges in alignment with the PHFA, Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency requirements, if you're doing a tax credit deal, what their range sizes were. So for example, a one-bedroom within the PHFA requirements is 550 to 850 square feet. We then tried to align that, within that range, more to what a one-bedroom unit would be sized in the private market. Because if the units were actually being built in the development, they'd be built according to private market sizes. So we came up with about 600 square feet. Then we looked at the study that the BIA put together around this bill, and in those higher zoning categories, CMX 3, 4, 5, if you looked at their examples, their average construction cost was around $250 a square feet. So we simply took the kind of private market unit size multiplied by that private market building square foot, and we came up with, and that's how the fee was arrived at. Again, I think because of the somewhat uniqueness of Philadelphia's market in that our costs are high and our revenues are low, if we use that premise to figure out the fee, while that is probably equivalent to what a unit costs to build, it may be a bit high for our economics in order for the program and the economics to work.
So, but you feel we can defend those numbers?
Yes.
Okay. In terms of, can you explain the difference between, because the two zoning designations that are being added to the current program are RM 3 and 4. What is the difference in terms of size, footprint, and project between a CMX 3 and a RM 3 or 4?
I'm going to call a friend. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, so RM3, 4, and CMX3 are similar in that they all kind of are broadly categorized as multifamily garden-style type of zoning.
So the footprint is about the same?
Very similar, yes.
The only difference being the commercial piece of it?
Right, yeah, right. In the RM categories, it's basically RM residential multifamily. CMX is basically commercial and mixed use, so yes. The RM categories tend not to have that commercial or retail kind of use on the first floor. They tend to just be multifamily apartments, whereas in the CMX districts, you tend to have commercial or some kind of office retail use on the first floor with residential above.
In the last 3.5 years, how many folks have taken this voluntary program, and what do you think, why do you think?
So the ones who have actually developed the projects, we have more interest in it now, but the ones who have developed it is we've had two. Right? We've had the One Water Street project, which I think we're all aware of, that had committed to do the units on site and then switched up and ended up paying a fee in lieu. And then we have the bridge project at 205 Ray Street that actually did the units on site. That unit is up, the building is up, the units are occupied, that project's doing very well.
In terms of the enforceability of the bill as currently amended, do you think you have the administrative capacity and wherewithal to enforce it?
I think we've got the ability to do some of it. We already have in place around the voluntary piece, that, there's a deed restriction that has to be filed before you get your building permit, or you have to make the payment into court. I think one of the issues in here operationally that's difficult potentially are twofold. One is that this bill still allows the potential for units to be off-site, which is a little bit complicated, to be honest with you. And then the other thing that is a little bit complicated is this bill requires that the certificates of occupancy be granted for the affordable units either before or at the same time as the market rate units, which depending on unit type, again, could be complicated. Certificate of occupancy is general around life safety types of issues. So, let's say you're doing a 10-unit development and you have 2 market rate ones that come online, and then, it's just a little bit complicated to say that for sure that the certificates of occupancy, that timing may be a little tricky.
In terms of because this is the point, the reason we've kept in the ability to do off-site is because we wanted to empower the administration based on the project to make that determination, right? And you think it would just be cleaner if people either do it or don't do it, and we believe that we'd like the administration to have some flexibility.
Yeah, I
about
just think it gets complicated to figure out how to make that operational. And that's something that we'd have to really think through about how that would work, how you'd staff it, how you'd oversee it on different levels. I think beyond just planning and development, that brings in L&I and maybe some other folks, and how we will coordinate that is a little bit tricky. I think the complication versus the amount of units you're likely to get, I'm not sure that the complication is worth the handful of additional units.
Okay. In terms of the marketability, because this theme keeps coming up, I mean, one of the things, when these affordable units do come online, there's thousands of people applying for them. So what is the concern around marketing affordable rates, particularly downtown with, on some of these areas, given the amenities? Why do you think that continues to be an issue, the marketability of affordable?
Hard for me to speak to that, given that
Well, you come
that's
from
not
the-
my
you come from
area.
the industry.
That's not my area of expertise, but I just think probably because you're potentially, and again, I'm kind of doing this off the cuff, but probably because it's just a different, potentially different market than what some of these developers who are used to marketing to. The income requirements and verification, I think it's just maybe something they're just not used to and familiar with.
One last question, and I'm going to give it to my council colleagues, because clearly we've been having this discussion for a long time. What exactly is the city's affordability plan? What are the tools that we're using, and how many units are we building a year currently?
Right. So I think we have several programs. I think we frankly have not done a good job of putting all those programs together to say this is our strategy. I think what people are most familiar with are 2 things. One is our low-income housing tax credit program and preservation of those units, where we probably create another 300 to 350 units a year, and we preserve probably about the same number through expired tax credits and subsidies. Then we have our basic system repair, or home repair programs, which is basic system repair, adaptive mod, and weatherization. As this body knows, we were doing about 1,100 houses a year, but had a substantial backlog. The city council was able to get an increase in the transfer tax that allowed us to issue a bond to do additional grants that will help us clear up that backlog. So we believe we will get up to around 3,000 plus units a year that we're able to treat that way. And then I know there's a loan program, a bond issue for a loan program to do home repair, working its way through council right now. So I think those are our big things. The other thing is obviously we work hand in hand with the Philadelphia Housing Authority that probably does more production than we do. They may bring on, 600-700 units a year, but oftentimes that's replacing their existing units. So I don't know that there's a big net gain as far as their inventory of housing that's created. I know they are doing they are starting to tackle the vacant scattered sites, which have not been addressed for years. So they're bringing on, I want to say maybe about 100 units of those every year, but that's an expensive proposition. In addition to that, we are working on getting our land bank operational and figuring out what would be a land management strategy for the city. I think one of the things that puts us at an advantage from other cities is, particularly cities that have huge pressure on their housing market, is they wish they had some land that was in public ownership. And I think we have to look at how we can best utilize that. We do have a local housing trust fund, another thing that they talk about cities should really look at, but I think we do want to figure out, how do we further resource that? I'm trying to look at some of these other things. But we have a lot of the programs, the water bills based on your income, all our tax forgiveness programs, all of those things. We have a lot of things that are around how do you deal with this issue. But I think we need to package those and really take a closer look at what we have, what are the gaps, and what do we need to do to fill those gaps.
Okay. Thank you. Councilman Jones?
Thank you so much. And let me give respect to the author of this bill who has brought the issue to the forefront and something that is at least courageous and forward-thinking. Ms. Fadula, let me ask a couple of questions. I ran into you at a meeting and you were racking your brain about the strategy that Councilwoman Sanchez talked about. And there are a couple of caveats that, first of all, define for me affordable housing. What does that mean numbers-wise?
So, the sort of recognized understanding of the definition of affordable housing is when you're paying no more than 30% of your income towards your housing costs. And by housing costs, it's not just your rent or your mortgage, but it's your utilities, your your property taxes, if you do that, your homeowners or your renters insurance. So all of your housing costs together should be no more than 30% of your gross income.
So define that by PHA's new units coming online, or RDA, or PHDC. What's the average cost of a 3-bedroom, quote, affordable home?
Right. So I think, I'm not sure exactly what the rent is, but in terms of PHA, so PHA's mandate is really to deal with people at very low income. So they tend to have people in their units that are at 30% of median or below, but all of their money is predicated on no one can pay more than 30% of their income for housing costs. So they do have some people that are at higher income levels, but no one pays more than 30%.
So to produce a unit in Philadelphia, on average, how much does it cost? 3-bedroom.
So to produce a unit in Philadelphia, 3-bedroom, if you are doing it with one of the federally subsidized programs, it's probably $350,000 to $400,000 a unit.
So $350,000 to $400,000.
Right. If you're doing it on the private market, again, it depends on what size the unit is. I mean, there's a lot of variables in there to just say it's this cost.
So let's put that as the level, that average for Philadelphia. What is the average income per household in Philadelphia?
So I believe the median income in Philadelphia is around $37,000, maybe a little less than
I
that.
don't want to do that math.
Does anybody have that?
Do that
Yeah.
math. So to get a $300,000 conventional mortgage, you have to make how much roughly?
If I would have known there were math problems. So if you assume that a $300,000 mortgage costs probably about $1,000, $1,200 a month, and then you take, you say that that's, let's say, 28% of someone's income, I would guess you need upwards of more than the median income.
So I want you to understand, in my district, I thought we would never have to deal with this. I thought in my district, there would be plenty of inventory to be balanced in that. What I'm finding in my reality over the past 10 years is that's not true. Like there is apartheid in areas where either you can afford it, and it isn't based on race. It is not based on race, which is, a part of Martin Luther King's dream. I get it. But what I'm saying to you is that if you cannot afford, you need not apply to come live in this neighborhood, which sets into play where you go to school, where you get your health care, where you go to work, and it has a whole other set of circumstances that come with that zip code. So I've been to Seattle, and I was talking, when you go to Seattle, you talk to the waiters and the caddies, and that's how you figure out what's going on, right? The waiter in the hotel I stayed in for the Human Relations Commission conference said he traveled an hour to get to work, and he couldn't afford to live in the house that his grandparents once owned. So what I need to know is whether this bill gets out of committee or not, What is our strategy to really address that? My daughter is not, or my son, income insufficient, meaning that they make okay salaries. They can't afford to buy a house in the neighborhood that they grew up in. That's their reality. And so they are in rental hell, waiting for me to die so that they can inherit my house. And I informed them over Thanksgiving, I intend to live forever. so we need
Cook
to,
the dinner.
so we need to figure this out, because if their future is in Darby, Cowwind, and other places, that's not the Philadelphia that we should have. And so we have to, I understand there's a lot of, believe me, I got 60 emails when I came in the door today. I got letters right here from groups that I won't say who they are. I don't want to out them. You got it? That are my constituents, and they are well-meaning. We have to figure this out independent of this. We need to look at the fact that President Clark found 3,000 houses that were in jeopardy of being either picked up by sheriff's sale or being lost to private sector developers. And trying to figure a way that, how do we do those developments in light of the fact that Trump has the proposed skinny budget coming that zeroes out OHCD and HUD monies. So we have to figure that out, and quickly. So there is a sense of urgency to this. I don't want to go through neighborhoods that everybody used to be from and can't afford to be in. So we depend on you. We depend on this dialogue that's going on, but we better figure it out quickly. Yeah. And then finally, a question, an actual question, not a statement, is where are you at on tax abatements?
So I think that's probably something that the administration will look at. I don't have a direct response to that. I think it's something that we're probably, I know it's been looked at 3 or 4 times in the past. I think as the city evolves, all these things probably have to be looked at. I will say this, a new unit under subsidy programs is very expensive to build because there's a lot of requirements that come with it. On the private market, it doesn't cost $400-some thousand to build. And also we have a lot of existing inventory in our city, and so that's, I think, why we're investing so heavily in preservation programs, because I think what we've realized is the most affordable house is to keep people in the house they already have. That being said, there still is a balance for new production and additional preservation and how we're going to deal with that. I would say, again, not that we shouldn't have our eyes on these issues. We definitely should, and they are real in Philadelphia, but we can't necessarily compare ourselves to what's going on in the other cities because for example, we are a much larger city than Seattle. We have a lot more room in our housing market that Seattle does, but I think one of the things that we can learn from cities, particularly that are in the Bay Area or our other cities on the East Coast that are going through these housing pressures, is now is the time to be having this discussion and to be figuring this out and thinking about it rather than when you're really in crisis mode. And we're not necessarily in crisis mode, but we are in tipping point, and we should be having this conversation.
We actually are, because if Amazon comes here with 50,000 new employees, right, each one bringing one child and or spouse or both, that's going to have an impact on affordability. Everything will go up. And so, what was undesirable will become necessary. If you look at New York, if you look at, you have to live 3 deep to live well. And so we need to be thinking about this now. My chairman is looking at me. The final point of this is one thing impacts the other. So I asked you about tax abatements. You cannot just pull one little thing out and not think it is going to not have a rippling effect. So we need to be deep thinkers on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. And if you plan to live forever, I hope you ate well, healthy last Thanksgiving.
Depends on who's making dinner, whether you're living forever or not.
Thank you. Next, Councilman Heenan, then Councilman Squilla, then Councilman Taubenberger, and Councilman Dom, I didn't forget about you, once we're through the committee here. Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I too want to thank the councilwoman for really focusing in on the affordability of the housing market for the citizens of the city of Philadelphia, and thinking of some ways that some currently exist. And it essentially I don't know what I know what she's trying to do here, but forcing the conversation about having affordable housing conversation in the master plan to that. And when you had mentioned land bank, does land bank have an affordability master plan when it comes to housing?
So there is a strategic plan. I think the strategic plan touches on a few different areas. One is affordable housing. There's also market rate housing. There's side yards. There's community gardens. But I think, to be quite honest, the land bank needs to play some catch-up, right? It's been in effect for a few years now. A lot of the first couple years was cleaning up deeds and that kind of thing, but we are just now, we just hired our first permanent executive director, so we're really just starting to get it operational now. So we don't have as clearly defined a land management strategy as we should have.
Because I think you raised a question, and it was brought up that we have a lot of plans and goals as a city addressing poverty, addressing certain other issues, and affordability when it comes to housing should be something I think is up in front when it comes to as we move forward. I don't know if we're there yet, but I think I wanted to rehash what you had mentioned and make sure that these numbers are correct. You said that the low-income tax credit, we are building 300 to 350 units
About
per year.
that, 300 to 350 units a year. So it depends on when the credits get awarded and when projects can close, but we're usually around in that range, yes.
And is that an average over the last 5 years?
Yeah,
3
I would
years?
say that's right. We're hoping that we up our average a little bit. We've been trying to more closely align what the city provides subsidy to with what the PHFA requirements are. We've had a couple years, prior years, where the city has funded 7 or 8 projects, and only 1 or 2 of those have actually gotten tax credits. So we're trying to really make an effort to not leave any resources on the table.
All right, and you said that the BSR, because
Basic system repair,
right,
yeah.
so the basic system repair, we increased our backlog by 3,000.
Right, yeah, so we're going from about 1,100 to a little over 3,000 based on having the additional bond dollars available.
Okay, and we had to increase that backlog. All right, we raised our realty transfer tax, is that correct?
Correct.
And what did we raise that? Just a tenth of a point?
It was 3%, it's now 3.1%. Yeah.
0.1%. And has the administration done a comparison or evaluation on the real estate transfer tax opposed to the inclusionary zoning programs that we have here now?
We have
including
not
the
yet.
amendments?
No, that has not been done.
All right, so what I'm getting to is there's a lot to take in consideration. When you have the low-income tax credits, you have the BSR, you have land bank. I don't know why land bank isn't included on any of the long-term master plans when it comes to affordable housing in the city of Philadelphia, because it seems like we're doing some. We certainly can be doing a lot more, but how do we leverage what we're doing and really meet the goals of this body and the administration and the citizens of Philadelphia? So if you were to put a group together or a timeline for a affordable housing package, would you have a rough estimate?
A rough estimate
Yeah,
of...
I mean, would it take 6 months? Would it take 3 months?
So,
Would it take
I actually feel like you're kind of a plant, actually, because, when the charter change went through to create the Department of Planning and Development, one of the things that created was a Housing Advisory Board. So the Housing Advisory Board has been meeting, I want to say, for about a year. It only meets quarterly, but there is a subcommittee of that board that's particularly looking at the preservation of affordable housing. It had been focusing on the preservation of subsidized units because, as most folks know, the city used to get a lot more subsidy dollars from the federal government and from the state. And so, 15, 20 years ago, we were able to fund a lot more, even 30 years ago, we were able to fund a lot more affordable housing that's now aging out of its compliance period. And since we have reduced dollars available, we don't necessarily have the subsidy dollars that will be needed for the capital improvements and that to have those units that are aging out of subsidy to be continuing to be affordable. So there was a subgroup formed to specifically look at that issue. We're expanding it to include what's called naturally occurring affordable housing as well, which is what Philadelphia has a lot of that, which is just kind of based on unit condition and income, and that we have a lot of housing in Philadelphia that's just naturally affordable to our population without any subsidy. However, we've been losing that inventory at a very, very rapid rate, so it's something else we want to keep an eye on. All that being said, we are under a very intentional process right now. We hope to get an RFP on the street very soon to actually do a housing plan. So as you may know, because of the federal funds we get, every year we do a consolidated plan, but that is really based on HUD guidelines and what they require us to report on in order to get the federal grants. It's not necessarily a comprehensive look at what is going on in housing in Philadelphia. So that is something that we are right on the verge of undertaking. Ironically or serendipitously, whichever one you want to talk to, we have spent a lot of time over the past, I would say, 30 to 45 days talking with Seattle. They put out a plan that we believe is something that is a really good plan the way they did it. It's not hundreds of pages long. It's very succinct with, I would say, not just lofty, I think they're achievable, but they're reach, right? The goals they came up with are reach. It's not, that you can just easily attain them. It's really reach, and then figuring out based on those goals, then what are the things you need to implement. I have to say, one of the things we're finding is that in Philadelphia, we have most of the policies, programs, tools in place. It's just, as with so many things, it's getting the resources needed to fully implement and to treat the, the problem is great and the resources are few, and it's not necessarily about creating a new program or policy. It's really about how do we figure out how to attract additional resources, particularly as Councilman Jones talked about. It doesn't look like we're going to get any more resources, let alone will we maintain the resources we already get from the federal government.
And I know just in my district alone, I have an incredible amount of available housing stock and units that would qualify for a lot of the existing programs. And some of the programs a lot of programs are actually being taken advantage of now because it's necessary and they need it. Would you, before you put together a master plan and study, could you, include, but could you provide to the chair first could you do a comparison for an impact fee and the program that amended today, this legislation as amended, and see what the comparison is as far as value and revenue sources that would be provided for affordable housing?
Sure. So I guess what you're asking us to do is take a look at what, and we'll have to have some sort of baseline assumptions of what the bill as proposed potentially would provide in either units or dollars into the housing trust fund if people make the payment in lieu, or that would be one set of data. And the other set of data would be, and we'd have to pick what we thought the impact fee would be, because if there was just a straight impact fee, what kind of, that would generate revenue, right, wouldn't create Well, it wouldn't specifically create
Why
units, I
don't we
guess it
start with the
could.
same increments that we did last time for the BSR? And then just have it, if it was the 10th, do, per 10th. And
Okay, just want to make sure that I'm clear what you're asking.
Basic.
Right, because basic system repair was based on an increase to
All right,
the
to realty
transfer
transfer
tax.
tax. Correct.
Right, so do you want us to look at if we did
Just-
an
just-
additional increase to the transfer tax? What
Sure.
that would, like, what are you asking me to look at?
Yes. The real estate transfer tax.
Okay, so if we did an additional increase to the transfer tax, and that came into
Into.
the housing trust
the
fund, or
housing
we
trust.
used it to float a bond, which is what we did for basic system repair?
Correct. I'm just looking for numbers.
Okay, we will do our best, and I think probably what's going to happen is we will make an attempt, and then we'll come back to you, and you may say, no, what we really wanted you to look at was XYZ as opposed to ZYX, but I think we can get there.
You got it.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Before I recognize Councilman Squilla, I'm going to ask Ms. Marconi to call the next panel, the first panel, just so they can sit right up there in those chairs, so we can kind of keep moving, because I want people to realize we actually are going to hear from the public eventually. Okay, so Ms. Marconi, just call those names, and we'll go back to the questions for Ms. Vidal.
Rashida Phillips, James Wright, Tanya Young, Magina Rashid.
Okay, if you could just sit in these black chairs right inside there, so you're ready to go. And Councilman Squilla, then Taubenberger, Bass, Allen, we're getting to you, okay? Councilman, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I'd like to thank Councilwoman Sanchez for her work on this bill, and also her willingness to listen to our concerns and our RCO's concerns as we approached her with them and initiate amendments. We still have some questions, and I want to piggyback on two of my colleagues. Councilman Jones talked about the neighborhoods and how that sometimes gentrification sets in and people who live in those neighborhoods can no longer afford them. How does this bill affect that?
So, I could probably argue several different ways of this. I mean, I think one of the things about this is that it does now add an additional, level of complexity for doing development in the higher density districts, which then could put pressure on the lower density districts, because people may say, I don't want to deal with the complexity of developing in the higher density districts, so I want to go to the lower density districts. There could be that.
Wait, just one question. So I was just saying, in other words, does this keep the affordability in the neighborhoods? This bill?
I think that the honest answer to that question is no bill is going to necessarily address the level of complexity with that issue. I think this is another tool in the toolbox, and potentially could, if developers take the option of the fee, and if they, if the fee was reasonable and economically feasible, and they took that option and it went into the Housing Trust Fund, as most of folks are familiar with, the Housing Trust Fund is really targeted towards providing, of resourcing the programs that provide affordable housing at that lower income levels, and most of that does happen in the neighborhoods. So if there's more resources available through the Housing Trust Fund, there could be more affordability in the neighborhoods. At the same time, there is more pressure potentially now on, more complexity on the higher zoning category, so that may in turn push development to some of the lower density ones, which may not be great for affordability. So I think, there's different aspects of this are going to have differing pressures. Thank you.
All right. So I think now, since the amendments, it's the higher zone properties, 3, 4, 5. And we have, I know at least in my district, we've done several of these, right? We have the 1 Water Street, we have 205 Race that I used the bonuses, but we also did affordable housing, Grace Townhomes, Cantrell Street, and St. Francis. So we were able to do them in certain areas using tax credits and other programs. The only two that really took advantage of the bonuses was 205 Race and 1 Water. Now, that there will 205 Race actually put the units in. So we have the affordability of those units into that project. One, Water Street paid into the Housing Trust Fund, so that money goes into the Housing Trust Fund to build developments throughout neighborhoods or whatever it is that we deem appropriate through the Housing Trust Fund. But the way I look at this, it doesn't really stop the gentrification process in the regular neighborhoods that we see, because we're only allowing the units to be in 3, 4, and 5 areas, which would mainly be center city areas would have a higher zoned areas. Is that correct?
So again, what it does is if folks, they can either put the units on site, which, again, you can argue that it may be slow down gentrification somewhat because then those market rate units are in these higher density areas as opposed to going out in the neighborhoods. Or if it's dollars going into the Housing Trust Fund, you could then invest in those neighborhoods in having things that would hopefully maintain some affordability in those neighborhoods. But I don't, again, I just have to state there's no sort of magic bullet, if you will, around the gentrification issue, so it's unlikely that one bill is going to deal with that. But I have to say also, one of the things that, a lot of the data supports around how do you deal with issues of affordability and those things in cities is to not stop development, right? I think, again, what you see in a lot of areas like particularly Austin and some of the Bay areas, is they have so much low-density zoning and it's so difficult to build there that they really have a limited supply, and that has caused, the affordability issue to really become prominent because there's just, it's not necessarily, well, it is that you can't afford it, but you can't afford it because there's just not enough of it. That is not our problem. Our problem isn't that we don't have a supply of housing. Our problem is a lot of it is old and in really horrible condition or deteriorated condition, and with our low income levels, it's really hard to either maintain it or to redevelop it, and then with our high construction costs, it's also very hard to build new. So it's not necessarily that we don't have a supply, it's just that it's not often in very good condition.
All right, the other question is, since, during this process, people reach out to us from the communities and have certain concerns, and one of them is the historic neighborhoods in the where you have overlays and height limits, and Central Delaware that we're working on also. How would this affect those with height? Because this is an FAR bonus. So will some people have to do this even not being able to use the FAR bonus, but they would still have to use the affordable units?
Well, so in our testimony, that's one of the things that we think needs a closer look. It's very difficult to apply a FAR bonus, a floor area ratio bonus, to areas that have a height limit. Essentially, what would happen is if the building can't get any taller, right, but you can put more volume in that building, the building gets fatter or wider, right? But then you have to make sure that that complies also with lot coverage ratios. So that is something that we think there needs to be a closer look at how that would work in these overlay districts, particularly where there's a specific height limit, because then the only way to capture your FAR is to get a wider building, but that may not work either, so that's something that needs more refinement.
And especially at our areas down, I know on the waterfront, where we're trying to keep open space and areas where we could have the narrower building, it would be better, but if you have to go wider for that purpose, it would be sort of, I don't know if it makes it more difficult for a developer to build it. Obviously, it would be a little more cheaper, I guess, if you're going lower but wider. But for the master plan of the Central Delaware, it sort of affects how that plan will be incorporated. Now, we do need to come up with a way to fit them, and like you said, we have to be able to massage these different things. To me, it can't be a one-size-fit-all model. We need affordable housing in every area of the city and all over the place. But like you said, it's going to be difficult to have one bill do that whole thing. So my questions are, how do we then massage this, or do we introduce something different to make other things happen that will not negatively impact those areas that already have protections in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is there's a reason why the zoning code is 400 or 500 pages long, It's complicated. It's really complicated. And when you push something here, rather than just something else happening here, because of the complication of the code, things happen all over. And it takes a while to figure out what are all those different things that happen all over, and it takes time, and it's complex, and it's something that needs to be looked at.
And I think we always call these unintended consequences. We find that out a lot on council here. We do something and it's not our intention. And I think Councilman Heenan was alluding to this, but I think he talked about more of the transfer taxes for redoing the affordable housing as far as repairs. But was there a study that how many houses this bill would create moving forward? To see that if we develop in certain areas, how many units would be added to our stock per year extra?
Right, so we haven't done that study. I think it's something that we would like to look into, but I can't say the administration has not done that study as of yet.
All right, I mean, that's also good to know too. And I mean, I like the option of going either into the Housing Trust Fund or to the units itself, and have the developer decide which way to go ahead of time, not after the fact, but ahead of time.
Right.
And I think that also makes it clearer for the communities to know what's happening, and makes the developers understand what they can and cannot build, or what they can afford and what they cannot afford. The other thing is, and you mentioned this briefly, that you looked at the Seattle model, even though it's a smaller city. Do they have it, I guess, based on zoning, their affordable units that are necessary, or is it across the board?
So we didn't specifically look at inclusionary zoning in Seattle, and I'm not actually, I'll be honest, I'm not sure whether they have it or not. We just looked at how they approach their housing plan.
Oh, okay.
I think, again, what's really pointed out in their piece is in fact, there was something that just came out now where they're trying to figure out how to zone for larger family apartments. I mean, they just really have a supply issue where they really don't have a lot of high density or multifamily zoning, and that's really put pressure on their market. So we want to look at their method because we think their method was a good method, but we're not going to end up with the same prescriptive programs or policies that they did, because again, their city is in a much different market and it's a different size, it's a different market, and it's got ultimately different housing pressures than our market does, but we think they had a good method of how they approached it.
And I see the fee associated with, and I don't know if we actually ever came up with a fee. Is there a way to come up with a formula for a fee based in an area that per unit, or would it be per number of units in the building? What would be the best way to address that?
For a fee
to the Housing Trust Fund?
You mean an impact fee?
Yes.
So
Because
typically.
the impact fee is part of this, right?
Well, payment, okay.
Well, it's not, I'm
So
sorry.
this is a
Is it-
payment in lieu, and, okay, so I think it's a couple things. Let's break it down. So traditionally in inclusionary housing zoning that you see in almost any city where you see it, where there's an option of units or fee, right? It's either you do the units or the fee is pretty much in par with what it would cost to build a unit. That's generally how inclusionary housing works, right? An impact fee, where it's just a fee, there's not the option of doing the units, it's just, you're gonna put in for a building permit, you're gonna build, and I'm making this up, 10 stories, and based on that, you have to pay X amount of fee, and that just goes right into a housing trust fund. That usually is based on a nexus study that says, when we build market rate housing, or we build retail space or an office space, by building that, the folks that are going to populate that space create a certain need for affordable housing. For example, if you built a 200-room hotel, predominantly the workers in that building are going to be, building maintenance or cleaning services, or that. Those folks that work in that hotel are going to create a need for affordable housing, right? And so then you figure out, okay, based on that, how much need for affordable housing is created, and you kind of take that and you look at that across your market and across your development, and then a fee is arrived at. And it's generally a per square foot fee.
Per square foot fee?
Yeah.
But isn't it similar, didn't we add this option into this bill?
So
Or is it similar? It's not the same, but
it's similar, but it's not the same. I would say, in both places, you end up with a fee, but how you get there and the calculation, the method is different.
Okay, so if there was, I know, because we have that in our current bonus option, correct? So it's.
Right, you can make a payment in lieu.
You can make
correct.
a payment in lieu of, so that's not a fee? Or is it?
It's well,
So that's why I'm confused now.
exactly. So they're both
That's what you're trying to
fees. All right, they're both fees, but let's just say one is a 1 plus 2 plus 3 formula. So let's say one is like a fourth grade formula, and the other formula is an algorithm. Right? So they're both fees, but the formulas are very different.
All right, but we could create either one as part of this process, or no?
Sure. I mean, those different things can be looked at.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, but they're different. I just want to, inclusionary zoning and an impact fee are different.
Councilman,
I
if we
understand.
could, okay, 'cause
I understand they're different, but, I mean, one includes the units, that's
Right.
inclusionary. The
That's
other
right.
one is a fee.
Right.
That would go into the housing trust fund so we could build units somewhere else.
Right.
Right? That's the two differences. Basically, just
Basically,
without getting too
basically,
complicated.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Councilman Taubenberger?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Councilwoman Quinones Sanchez for her leadership on this most important issue. Ms. Fadula, I have two questions. Hopefully they'll be brief. I just want to get a better understanding. Public land that would be available for development for housing, is that all in the land bank, or where is that in this?
So
bureaucracy?
it's in a combination of places still. I mean, we're in the process of transferring a lot of that to the land bank.
To the
I think
land
the
bank.
land bank probably has around, I want to say about 2,300 properties in it right now.
Okay.
We believe that there's probably about 8,000 or so properties that are publicly held within the city. So some of that is still in the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority inventory. It tends to be some of the larger pieces of land. Some of it is,
And a description of the larger pieces of land approximately?
you know, for example, the parking lot at 8th and Vine Street, that kind of thing.
Okay.
There's also public land, most of the land that was held by the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, PHDC, has been transferred in the land bank. I would say there's maybe 50-ish properties that are straggling, but that's because they've got a structure on them, or there may be squatter in the house, like there's an issue, which is why they haven't transferred in. And then there's also land that's owned by the school district. There's land that's owned by the Philadelphia Housing Authority that's vacant and publicly held.
Is that included in the 8,000 that you?
Yeah, in the 8 or
That's included.
9,000, yes. And then there's land that's owned by the Philadelphia Industrial Development, well, paid, Philadelphia Authority for Industrial Development. So we probably got 6 or 7 different public land holding agencies. Paid tends to have that land and offer it more for commercial or industrial development. So we have a lot. I think what makes it a little bit complicated is a lot of our public land is small lots, kind of the 1 or 2 off lots, and not necessarily a sizable development parcel.
But a small developer might be interested in that.
Right, well, so, you know, we're working on being much more aggressive with the side yard program, which is if you own a house and next to it is a vacant publicly owned lot, that you can acquire that for a side yard for your
Side
home. You know, we're really looking at that, but I think it's been a struggle to figure out what we really own, and that what we own is what we think we own. And we're in the process of doing that, and we need to have like I said, we're a little bit behind when it comes to our land management policy.
Because going forward, that would be very helpful to know what the resources are.
Yes, and we are doing that, but again, that land doesn't necessarily easily translate to just build a house on it because of the size of the parcels and that, but yes, again,
Well,
another tool in the toolbox,
With-
definitely.
With 8,000 pieces, a fair amount could be
Yes.
considered for development for affordable housing.
Yeah, it could be. Again, it's all about, it's great to have the resource of the land available, But we also need to have the resource then to actually construct the house.
Correct. Well, but you had also said there are some cities, for example, Boston, if I
That's
got
right.
your testimony, I thought I was following it well, it has difficulty because they don't have as much land.
That's right.
Where we have the land. We
Yeah,
have other
there
problems.
definitely is an important tool in the toolbox.
You had also mentioned, and this is my last question, so you have a sense I want to move this along, and I know there's other people that want to speak and questions and so on. But you had also said that we're losing some of the inventory that would be possibly go to affordable housing. Who are we losing that to, and how are we losing that?
So a couple ways. One is, as I mentioned, we used to get a lot more subsidy to produce affordable housing. So typically, the way the city has developed affordable housing with our both for-profit and nonprofit partners is there's tax credits that you get from the state, but that covers maybe 70 to 80% of the cost. And then the rest of the cost is provided by subsidy from the city that generally flows through the federal government. So that's usually our community development block grant dollars or our home dollars. And then there's also some other money that can come on from some other sources, but essentially that's how it's done. And we used to have a lot more of that subsidy dollars, and there used to be more tax credits available about 20, 30 years ago. So let's say back then, the city, and I don't have these exact numbers, but let's say the city was producing, 800 or 1,000 units a year then. And we talked about how now we only have the money to support maybe 300. So as those age out of their compliance period, so there's, usually the affordability is somewhere between 15 and 30 years that's required affordability for your funding. As you age out of that, those units come up. And oftentimes they've had some deferred maintenance or something like that, and traditionally what's happened is those projects may reapply for tax credits or something like that, but we don't have the amount of money to subsidize the number of units that are aging out of compliance. And so there's that. Then there's also some of these units were done in an area that 30 years ago may have been seen as a more depressed neighborhood in the city, but is now in a stronger market, and particularly if that project was developed by a for-profit developer, they may feel that it's more to their benefit to either restructure that as a market rate project or to sell it, and to not necessarily keep it as affordable. So we're losing units that way. We then are also losing what's called naturally occurring affordable housing, which is, again, in areas of the city where the rents used to be affordable and the markets are becoming stronger. Private landlords are realizing I can get more rent, so I'm going to rent it to somebody who can afford to pay more, and we're losing units that way. And then I'd say the third way we're losing units is simply because, again, aging housing stock with lower incomes or lower rents means it's very difficult to put the dollars in to maintain units, and so we're losing units because they're just falling apart, or they may have lead in them, or they may have other kind of health risks or those kinds of issues. And so really we have like sort of the perfect storm. We have subsidized units aging out of their compliance period. We have units where there's upward pressure on the markets, and then we also have units that we're just losing due to lack of ability to maintain
Lack
them.
of maintenance.
Yeah.
Mr. Dula, thank you very much, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Bass?
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Almost.
Is it? Have I been there this long?
I know, good evening, right? Almost. So, number one, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for your testimony. And I have to say, you've always been, easy to work with and talk to on this matter or other housing matters here in the city of Philadelphia. So I just really wanted to thank you for all of your work there. I think that this is a very important issue, and it's very important that we get it right. And, we have to recognize that there is an urgency, that Philadelphia has a very large, the largest of any big city, population of those living in poverty, and that there are things that we can do about it. So that being said, I want to thank also the bill's sponsor, Councilwoman Quinones Sanchez, for all of her work and dedication, and working, for the last few weeks throughout the holiday weekend, just working nonstop, it seems like, to address this very important issue. And one last thing I wanted to say, I want to recognize Majida Rashid from Nicetown CDC, who we've done countless projects with in an effort to address a neighborhood in my district, Nicetown. And, one of the things I heard you say earlier is how we're losing these affordable housing units and how, it seems like we're almost a victim of our own success because, we've gone into some of these neighborhoods that were not as well, that were, I would say, somewhat troubled or blighted, years ago. And now that they've come up and they're in a better situation, a better position, and the landlords want to rent for more, there's an opportunity for them to make more money and to, move those units from affordable into market rate. And so the question now is, what do we do about other neighborhoods that haven't had those opportunities? So, I just really wanted to put that out there because we have a huge issue with folks who need quality, decent, affordable housing. And so that being said, I wanted to get a sense, and I think that you have addressed this in different ways, but I need to ask my own way a little bit more directly, but what the city is actively looking at and studying regarding affordable housing, because I heard you say in some of your comments that, we, in the last 30 days or so, we were talking to the folks out in Seattle, and, was it Seattle?
Yes.
Okay, and so, I know we've been doing it for longer than 30 days, but if you could back up and say, where have we been on this issue and where are we right now? Because I just don't get a comprehensive sense that we have a long-term strategy for dealing with this situation. We're excited about the building boom that we have here in Philadelphia, but I don't get the sense that we've also looked at the other side and how do we deal with those who can't afford to live in the pricier units.
Right. So, as I mentioned before, we have a lot of programs. We're in the process of basically putting together like a two-page or so people. So we can say, when you say to me, what is it? I can give
That'd
this
be
to you
great.
and it's very accessible. It's not an 800-page affirmatively furthering fair housing plan or, a 300-page consolidated plan. That being said, this city is very aggressive and progressive, a lot of because of the work that's been done by this body on dealing with maintaining affordable home ownership, right? We talked about all the home repair programs that we offer, both grant programs, and now we're working on a more robust loan program. We have a lot of property tax forgiveness or deferral programs. We have, utility assistance programs. We are really at the forefront. Really, if you look at what's going on in other cities, the number of programs we have and the aggressiveness of those programs, we are really at the forefront.
Okay.
Where we are lacking is on the rental housing side. So, we just put some dollars into having a program on the rental side, somewhat similar to our mortgage diversion program on the home ownership side, where we provide a legal representation and also some support services for tenants to try to reduce the eviction issue we've got going on and to try to provide some supports there. We are looking at some pilot programs around maybe how to provide some assistance to landlords of 1 to 4 units, smaller landlords. But that's another place where we got to play some catch up as far as rental housing supports. And so that's something we really are aggressively looking at, which is again why I mentioned that we have that subcommittee of the Housing Advisory Board that's particularly around maintaining or producing affordable rental housing. So that is an area where we need to catch up a little bit there and figure out what are the best practices around that, what are those programs. And again, it really comes down to resources. Even if we come up with the best programs, the best policies, we got to figure out how to resource, and this is a very challenging time to be in this business, given that there's not additional resources or, coming out of the state. There's probably not any additional resources, and we're hoping to hang on to the minimal resources we get from the federal government, and that means there's more pressure on the local scene. But as we know, as usual, we all know that there's a lot of pressure about resources with us on the local scene, that there's a lot of things that need to be resourced. And so all of that together makes it complicated, but again, we have pretty aggressive programs when it comes to the home ownership side. We've got some catching up to do on the rental side.
Okay. One other question, and because I'm really looking at this from, it's a housing issue, obviously, but how are we addressing it? And I don't know that you can really answer this question, but from a poverty perspective, because we do a lot of work on, poverty and how we're, attacking and addressing, that big elephant in the room, that issue that we have. But what is the city's, housing plan regarding poverty in the city of Philadelphia?
Yeah, so one of the other things that we're working on that I haven't mentioned yet is we do have this housing advisory board, and we have that piece, but we also have within the city what we call our housing cabinet, which is myself and then folks from my staff that represent the Office of Housing or Division of Housing. And then also, we have Department of Behavioral Health around the table, LNI, PHA, Office of Supportive Housing, and we have a kind of a group mix that says, okay, what are the different health department, what are the different kind of housing issues and poverty issues facing these different agencies are dealing with, and how can we have a more comprehensive approach? And again, it's similar to how we talked about with the zoning code. It's complicated, you push a button here. It's kind of the same thing in the housing world, right? Like if more resources get put towards supportive housing, well, that affects the resources over here. And a really good issue is LNI and code violations. A lot of folks are like, just go out and inspect every unit to make sure it's housing quality, but we know if we do that, we're gonna end up putting potentially people on the street because we're gonna go into a unit, it may not be habitable, and have we really solved the problem that we need to solve? So that group is coming together to make sure that kind of the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, but also to do as much as we can to come up with good programs and policies and to leverage each other's resources so that we're not ending up with a bunch of unintended consequences.
I think that's a very important issue to address and to think about, because I know that, we go into units, we go into, apartment complexes, in all of our districts, and we see living conditions which are completely unacceptable, but you recognize when you shut down, the landlord, you really are forcing people out who have no place else to go. And so, how do you balance that? So I'm glad that the city is certainly looking at that, because we don't want to make the problem even worse.
Right,
So,
yeah.
But I thank you for that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Dom, you've been very patient over there. And I promise we are getting to the public at some point in time. Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. And thank you, Councilwoman Sanchez, for your leadership on this bill. I will say, for the record, I'm in favor of affordable housing. In fact, growing up till I was 13, my parents, my brother and I lived in a 800-square-foot apartment that was $100 a month. That was pretty affordable. What I'm questioning is affordable homes that cost us $350,000 to $400,000. That doesn't equate, in my mind, to affordable. So my question, simple question for you is, in the Housing Trust Fund, what is the average contribution or improvement that we make to citizens of the city? Is there an average? Is it $10,000? Is it $20,000? What's the average?
So I have to say, a lot of the Housing Trust Fund, it goes through a variety of programs. So some of it is housing counseling, and some of it is dollars into units. But so, for example, in our preservation programs, it's an average of $10,000 a unit.
Okay.
And even when we subsidize a tax credit unit, it's usually in the range of like $75,000 to $80,000 a unit that comes out of our pocket.
So worst case, if we're comparing spending $400 for affordable homes or the Housing Trust Fund, it's worst case a 5-to-1 ratio. And if it's 10,000, it could be a 40-to-1 ratio of people that we could help through the Housing Trust Fund. They didn't like my comments, I guess, right?
Right. The math isn't, the math is the math, but like I said, the dollars, sort of the local or federal resources that go into that, the cost of a new construction of a unit is about $75,000 to $80,000, and the rest is leveraged through tax credits.
Okay. Well, I guess I want to join with some of my colleagues who I do think we need a detailed fiscal impact study on this bill. And this is why I say this. I heard from housing advocates that are in favor of it. I've heard from developers who are against it, so much to the point they will go to other areas, Pittsburgh, et cetera, to develop. And this morning I heard from 2 banks that concerns me. I wrote down what they said to me. They said, this is a credit risk which would impede our ability to lend capital to developers in Philadelphia. That's a concern. That will slow down, as you said, job growth in our city. Having said all that, I have a few comments I just want to share with the committee in this bill. Of the top 20 cities in the United States, according to the 2017 Bloomberg Global Housing Report, Philadelphia is the second most affordable city to buy or rent a house in the United States. In fact, in our presentation to Amazon, one of our biggest selling points was that we are the most affordable city competing. We're the most affordable. eConsult did a study. I think there's 579,000 parcels in the city. There's 450,000 single-family homes in Philadelphia. And according to the study, 209,000 of those homes are affordable to people earning $30,000 of income or less. $30,000 of income or less, 209,000. In fact, 450,000 are affordable, 380,000 of those homes are affordable to people earning $60,000 or less. So basically what we're saying is in the city of Philadelphia, 46% of our housing stock is affordable to people earning $30,000 a year or less, and 84% of our housing stock is available to people earning $60,000 or less. And here's some of the reasons I think what it indicates to me. I'm not sure we have an affordable problem. I do think we have a quality problem. And I think that backlog has to be addressed. And maybe this bill can help address that. But I do think we need to address those issues. It's very important. And the power of interest rates hasn't come up in this conversation. But I've been around real estate a long time. And the power of interest rates today has made affordability better than it's ever been in 30 or 40 years. In 1982, a home in Philadelphia that sold for $50,000 had a higher interest rate payment than a home that sells today for $250,000. Wow. And that's the power of interest rates. So affordability may not be the total problem. It might be the quality of the product that we deliver. Let me mention a few other facts. I was listening to some of the testimony. I've been in real estate a long time, and in the last 45 years, new ground-up construction, new ground-up construction. I think there'll be 3 condo buildings that will make monies in the last 45 years. One was Symphony, hopefully one Riverside, and hopefully 500 Walnut. But here are the facts. Center City 1, 1326 Spruce, 182 units, bankrupt. Norman Wolgen built it, bankrupt, back to the bank. Academy House, Weinstein and Klaus built it, bankrupt, 576 units. River's Edge, 2301 Cherry, bankrupt, back to the bank. 10 Rittenhouse, bankrupt. The Rittenhouse Hotel and Condominiums, 3 different owners, bankrupt. In fact, the old statement used to be, always be the third buyer of a high-rise building in Philadelphia. Maybe you'll make some money, because the first 2 will get destroyed by the market. And part of this is because it takes so much time and energy to build a new building. And the time frame, even, by the way, everyone thinks people are making a fortune. I will say from a personal experience, the Park and the Warwick, for me personally, were a disaster. We didn't make money. We got killed because of the economy. People get hurt because it takes so long and the economy changes. It's not what people think it is. That's my point. So I just want to summarize and say for the committee and my council colleagues, you know, I'm a believer in Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. I believe we should fund the Housing Trust Fund. But I do believe that for broad-based programs, there should be broad-based taxes. It shouldn't be directed into one industry. And I've learned that over time, and I wish I knew that from the beginning when I was here. But I've learned that over time. So I just want to comment on that. And I would like to see the administration do a total fiscal impact study of these issues. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. I think anyone else have a question?
Three follow-ups.
Okay,
and I'll
we
keep-
can make it quickly because we have a whole lot of people here.
Point
Councilwoman?
of information, Councilman Dom, I try to take notes so I'm accurate in the repeat. You said that the 2 banks called to us said they will not lend to developers who want to do affordable housing?
Credit risk, the credit risk is, if they can't quantify the credit risk, it makes it tough for them to underwrite the loan.
Okay.
So we have to somehow, in your committee, we have to figure out a specific number, I think, so they can underwrite the loan versus an open, unknown number. Whatever it is, we got to figure, whatever that number might be, it's got to be specific.
Okay. And then you said that there's an existing housing committee that is purely focused on how we as a city do better with regards to affordable housing, correct?
The housing plan?
Yes.
Actually, the plan is to look at the market across the board in Philadelphia, from homelessness to luxury high-rise.
Okay, all right. Is the City Planning Commission at that table?
Yes, they are.
Okay, well, that's encouraging to know. I don't think we can or should do anything without them being at the table. And then lastly, I've learned that, well, first of all, let me repeat Councilwoman Bass's comments, that we are in a housing boom, and I think that's a good problem. You know, the challenge for us as legislators is to find the delicate balance so that we end up with a win-win. And so to learn that 2 developers took advantage of the voluntary mixed income incentive, the existing bonus, is good news. What do we need to do, and the work groups need to do, to make that existing bonus more attractive? Was that discussed at all in the work groups? And we need to give credit also to the sponsor for recognizing that government does not, we don't believe we know it all, which is why we bring unlike minds to the table to figure it out. So was that one particular measure ever discussed in the work groups to see why 2 took advantage of it voluntarily and others chose not to?
Yes, I mean, it was discussed in the working groups, that the aspect of why only 2 groups, and then also kind of what we can learn from that language, which is, again, I believe, and I don't want to speak for Councilwoman Sanchez, is why you see a lot of the amendments that were made to the bill that was originally introduced move it much closer to what is currently on the books as a voluntary bonus. I do think there's probably additional work and thought and analysis that needs to be done to figure out how you would actually take the voluntary piece to convert it to mandatory and make sure that it achieves what you want it to achieve.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, real quick, Mr. Chairman. And I just speak this with Councilwoman Sanchez, but the condo market, and we talked about the sales of condos, the assessment values on those condos and the HOAs, the fees, would the assessments on those values, condos, be less, or they would still be assessed, even though there's a 10-year tax abatement? For the 10 years, they would have the same rate, but then what happens after that?
Do they get reassessed after the tax abatement goes away?
Well, no, I'm just saying, the affordable units, they get taxed at a lesser rate, or they get taxed?
So
at what value?
essentially, and again, I don't want to speak for OPA, but usually what happens in an appraisal is the appraiser takes into account anything that restricts the use or the revenue that could come from that property. So under the bill, I think it's 35 years? Is that where we are? 30? 50? 50. So, for example, the appraiser would take into account that for 50 years, that condo unit would have to remain affordable, and that would affect the value. And so and then the value would be less, so then the tax would be less even after the abatement.
So then OPA could assess that at a lesser value?
I believe that's what they would do.
All right, we'll have to hope.
Again, I remember, I started out by saying I don't want to speak for OPA.
All right, how about like HOAs, the fees, the condo
the
fees?
fees are the fees, and I think, that is, again, when we talked about what the definition of affordability, when it's all of your housing costs has to be at that 30%, I think there's a very high probability that particularly in luxury high-rise condo buildings, the fee itself is going to be more than that. And so that, by default, would, force those developers into having to make a payment. If inclusionary zoning is mandatory, developers of those types of projects would essentially have no choice other than to have to pay the fee into the Housing Trust Fund, because the unit, there would be almost no way to make the unit affordable just by the condo fee, potentially.
So you're saying they would most likely 90% of the time just pay the fee instead of having the units?
I think there'd probably be a heavy use of the fee option in that case.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. If there are no other questions, Ms. Fadul, you want to run out?
I was going
But
to say,
if I could ask you,
slowly back out of the room.
I could ask you if you cannot stay yourself, if you could keep members of the staff here.
Some staff
because,
here. I'm going to hang as long as I can.
Okay, because there might be, are questions that come up. I know you were involved in the amendments, that kind of thing. Okay, thank you. You did get out of here while it was still AM. I want to make that clear. All right, Ms. Marconi, will you call those names again so they can come up, please? Just for, I think we had a little change.
Rashida Phillips, Maria Gonzalez, Tanya Young, Mashida Rashid.
Okay.
Majida Rashid, I'm sorry.
And remember, 3-minute limit, please. Anybody that has submitted written testimony will be made part of the record. Mr. Gould, I didn't hear your name called, but how are we going to do this?
I'll be real quick.
Okay, please identify yourself and proceed.
My name is George Gould, and I'm a senior, attorney at Community Legal Services, where I have worked in the area of housing for over 45 years. I was very involved in the passage of the Inclusionary Housing Affordable Housing Program back in 2007, which required developers to provide affordable housing or contribute to the Housing Trust Fund when constructing new or rehabilitated housing. The program was never implemented because incentives for developers were not created, and also we were in a deep economic recession. A mixed-income housing or inclusionary housing program is extremely important, especially in this city, which is in desperate need of affordable housing. For example, a Federal Reserve Board study found that between 2002 and 2014, Philadelphia lost 1/5 of its low-cost rental housing. Rashida Phillips, to my left, will discuss the bill and the proposed amendments. I am here to emphasize the importance of a mixed-income housing program. Based on a recent study by the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, there are 886 jurisdictions in the country with inclusionary housing programs located in 25 states and the District of Columbia. The study found that inclusionary housing programs are ensuring long-term affordability, which is an effective way to maintain community assets and the affordable housing stock. The study also found that of the jurisdictions reporting, there were over 173,000 units of affordable housing created and $1.7 billion in lieu of building for the creation of affordable housing. The study noted, due to missing data, these numbers substantially underestimate the total in lieu of monies and units created by the entire inclusionary housing ordinances. It is extremely important that Philadelphia have a mixed-income housing program. I urge you to move forward on this, and I'll be glad to answer questions.
Okay. Perfect timing now. Please, identify yourself and proceed.
Good morning. My name is Rashida Phillips, and I'm the managing attorney of the Housing Unit at Community Legal Services. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Since the introduction of this legislation, CLS has worked closely with building professionals, key city administrative staff, civic leaders, and housing advocates to develop policies and procedures for qualifying renters and homeowners, pricing and marketing of units, monitoring and enforcement, and other key components of the program. George Gould co-chairs the Affordable Unit Size Subcommittee, while I co-chair the Accessibility and Compliance Subcommittee. Many voices and perspectives have come together with deep wells of expertise to craft a program that is practical, simple to administer, sustainable, and one that seeks to balance the needs of developers and housing providers and the individuals and families who will access affordable quality housing under this program. CLS has reviewed amendments to the bill with an eye towards this balance and the program's goals and intentions. Although we urge the passage of this bill in its current form, we strongly recommend future amendments that will grow the program and address the following. Income restrictions should be lowered to 30% of AMI for low-income eligible tenants and 60% for low-income eligible purchasers. Although the restrictions are less than or equal to the limits identified in the amendments, we are concerned that given the opportunity, housing providers will choose applicants that are at maximum eligibility. Lowering the income restrictions will encourage housing providers to consider applicants with lower incomes who fall within deeper levels of affordability, allowing the program to serve and benefit the families and people who need it most. Mixed income housing programs should apply to substantial rehabs and pre-existing structures. Substantial rehab and rehab of pre-existing structures may happen more often in some neighborhoods than new construction, where developers are converting old warehouses and industrial buildings into luxury and market-rate housing, such as the Penguin House, Eastern Lofts, and Pyramid Lofts. In order to truly ensure long-term affordability and to ensure developer compliance with agreed-upon affordability housing standards, increase the affordability period from 50 years to 99 years. Inclusion of more zoning districts to ensure generation of affordable units in locations that adequately address the need, or to ensure payments in lieu generate enough funding to create affordable units or fund home repairs at the scale needed. Zoning districts under the current amendments severely limit where the program will apply. In the poorest major city in America, where a lack of affordable housing has consistently been identified as one of the leading causes of homelessness among families with children, we are long overdue for a mandatory inclusionary housing policy. In my own North Philly neighborhood, known as Brewery Town, our community members have consistently been vocal at monthly civic association and zoning community meetings about the want and need for affordable housing in our area, so that long-term community members and young families can have an opportunity to continue to live in and give back to North Philly. I first moved to North Philly 15 years ago when I started as an undergrad at Temple. I have intentionally chosen to come back and to stay in North Philly as both a renter and homeowner. I bought my home 7 years ago next month. As a single young mother, first-time homebuyer, it was a struggle, but it would have been next to impossible to buy that same house in 2017, where the cost to buy a house has increased by 200% over the past decade in North Philly, or to be a working parent and college student renting in that same area with the way property taxes, development, gentrification, home prices, and rental prices have risen and proliferated. Skyrocketing housing costs and shrinking incomes have meant that all too often, displacement is a reality in gentrifying neighborhoods. Mixed income housing gives people who have stake in a growth of places like North Philly meaningful opportunities to intentionally contribute to that growth and give back to the communities they were raised in. CLS strongly supports all of the goals of this legislation, which seeks to keep up with growing housing demands in the city by leveraging all available resources. It seeks to ensure that long-term residents dedicated to their neighborhoods and their communities are able to stay in their communities even as rapid development occurs, and young families are able to remain in communities they have grown up in and want to return to or stay in. It seeks to expand housing for all residents and preserve economic and racial diversity in areas impacted by gentrification and redevelopment. These are all goals that will deliver our city to a more equitable and inclusive future. Like the hundreds of other cities and towns around the country where similar policies have been successful, we believe that a mixed income housing program in Philadelphia is workable. We strongly urge the passing of this legislation today. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Please, identify yourself and proceed.
Good morning. My name is Maria Gonzalez. I am the president of ACE, a community development corporation in Eastern North Philadelphia, and the vice president of the board of directors of PACDC, the Philadelphia Association of CDCs. On behalf of ACE, I'm here to testify for the support for the creation of a mixed income housing program in Philadelphia. We see this bill as another tool for increasing the number of affordable housing units for low-income families. In the past, Philadelphia was built around inequitable policies that created segregation and led to displacement. An example of these policies is what led to the displacement of Puerto Rican families from the Spring Garden and Art Museum neighborhoods close to Center City to other areas further north to include Fairhill, St. Hugh, Kensington, and Hunting Park neighborhoods, many of which have a high concentration of families living in poverty. Because of the limited incomes of our families, the affordable housing crisis is very much pronounced in our neighborhoods that are experiencing increasing home prices and rents. Throughout Philadelphia, waiting lists for affordable housing developments far exceed the number of units constructed and planned, attesting to the need for increased affordable housing options. As a nonprofit community developer, we see firsthand the increasing need and demand for affordable housing. ACE has developed over 400 units of rental housing for families and senior citizens, and we presently have waiting lists of over 2,000 people combined in our lists. Many of our applicants wait an average of 3 years just to move up to the top of the list. In many cases, our residents are left with little choice but to buy or rent housing in substandard conditions at higher costs. There are about 70,000 Philadelphia households that are extremely low income and pay over $500 in rent each month that they can afford. Many cost-burdened families are only but one crisis away from becoming homeless. The families we serve are no different than most families. They work hard, sometimes working 2 jobs, and want a decent, safe home they can afford. That's their American dream. Nonprofit community development corporations have been leading the charge in the development of affordable rental and homeownership housing while addressing other quality of life issues affecting poor communities. CDCs are the developers of last resort, and we focus our energies in transforming neighborhoods into communities of choice with a stable neighborhood economy to attract new public and private investments. After many years of work, a number of our neighborhoods are now experiencing a rebirth, attracting market rate development, thereby increasing rents and homeownership prices for many of the people that live there. CDCs like ASE are working at the grassroots level to assure that long-term residents are not displaced, and while also creating new opportunities for affordable rental and homeownership housing.
All right, Ms. Gonzalez, if I could ask you to, because our
Okay.
timing here, I think it's been more than 3 minutes, so if I could ask you to,
Yeah.
we can move on to the next speaker,
Okay,
please.
this bill is another mechanism for including and preserving affordable rental and homeownership housing and in fast appraising neighborhoods in the city and the core.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sid.
Please, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Good
My name
afternoon.
is Tanya Young, and I'm a resident at ASE. I've lived there for 12 years, and without ASE being there, present for me to live there, I don't know where I would be today. I actually speak for a lot of the residents at ASE because we get together. I sit on the committee. I sit on the zoning committee. I do a number of things in our area and downtown Philadelphia. I work down here at Heinemann. The homeless, the handicapped, the veterans, they're so important. If we don't have some kind of affordable housing, we don't even know. We see our homeless out here today, it's gonna double and triple within a matter of time if this bill don't pass. It's necessary. I'm not gonna take up too much of your time. I haven't slept all night thinking about this bill. I really haven't. It's important. Again, we at ASE, we're grateful to have a home such as ASE. It's affordable, it's fairly decent. My grandchildren we have gates, we're safe. It's necessary, we need it. Thank you again, and I'm not gonna take up any more of your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you. Ms. Rashid, please.
Good morning, Chairman Greenlee, Vice Chairman Squilla, and esteemed council. My name is Majida Rashid, and I'm the COO of the Nicetown CDC, also a member of the Philadelphia Land Bank and the Philadelphia Association of CDCs. I'm here to testify in support of Bill Number 170678 to establish an effective and strong mixed-income housing program in Philadelphia. Speaking on behalf of the Nicetown CDC, I want to convey why this issue is so important to us. Since the Nicetown CDC was founded in 1999, our organization has implemented a resident-driven mission to address the needs in Nicetown and surrounding communities. We've built a track record of affordable housing success, from scattered site housing preservation and redevelopment to our scale mixed-use developments on Nicetown's commercial corridor. Over the years, we've come to realize one of our biggest challenges is keeping enough affordable housing projects in the pipeline to meet the needs. We have extensive waiting lists for our existing rental developments and those interested in preservation or purchase of a new home. This, along with funding and related problems, challenges our priority to remain diligent to ensure housing affordability and access for the low to moderate income. Unfortunately, our city has a history of inequitable policies that created segregation, which led to displacement, including redlining. Our Councilwoman Cindy Bass made us aware of a recent study reported by NPR that disclosed a high concentration of redlining, particularly in the Nicetown area of Philadelphia. This, coupled with the lack of affordability, stacks the deck against those with low to moderate incomes, making it virtually impossible to obtain quality affordable housing. Additionally, proposed new market rate developments in close proximity to our Nicetown Court 1 and 2 affordable developments will not be providing any access for those with low to moderate income. This scenario is not just in Nicetown, but in other neighborhoods where PACDC members are working diligently to ensure equitable and affordable housing. Our appeal seeks to emphasize that the City of Philadelphia needs to correct past mistakes by preventing and eventually eliminating any threat of segregation or displacement. A mixed income housing program is one of the primary tools we can use to ensure provision of affordable and mixed housing. I got the bell, so we want to applaud and thank Councilman Quinonez Sanchez and the lead sponsor of this mixed income housing legislation, along with co-sponsors Council President Clark and Councilwoman Janie Blackwell and Kenyatta Johnson. Your diligence regarding policies and programs to advance affordable, equitable housing development will stabilize and build sustainable communities and improve the quality of life. We join you in this legislative effort to make the mixed income housing program a much-needed reality.
And if you have written, if you want to submit that, if there was things you left out, we'll make that part of the record.
I think we
Okay?
did submit it.
Thank you. Was there questions, Council?
George Gould.
For Mr. Gould, could you come back up, please? I think Councilwoman has a question for you.
Good morning. George, I've looked for your testimony over here. Can you simply restate for the record?
I'm sorry, what did they say?
Restate for the record the number of other cities that have figured out how to do inclusionary housing, and if any of those cities mirror Philadelphia in terms of size and/or demographics.
So she's asking how many other cities have inclusionary zoning policies and do any look like Philly?
Yeah. Well, there's 886 jurisdictions throughout the country that have either what's called inclusionary housing or mixed income housing programs. Many of those are in Massachusetts, New Jersey, and the District, I'm sorry, the District of Columbia and California, but they're spread out in 25 states have inclusionary or mixed income housing programs. So they've been around for a while, and they have been quite successful. The study I referred to went in and, looked at how many units have been created throughout this number of times and how much money has been contributed to equivalent of what's, we have the Housing Trust Fund. And also, of course, the number of affordable units that have been created. So the programs, quite frankly, have been very effective at a time when nationally the availability of affordable housing has been substantially decreasing. And Philadelphia is certainly one of the unfortunate cities where this is happening, and that really cries out for the need to create a program like this.
Well, as Ann Fadulin aptly pointed out, it makes sense only for us to compare ourselves with cities of that 886 jurisdictions. The only ones that make sense for us to look at or attempt to model after are those that mirror the size of Philadelphia. So that's what I'm trying to get to. Of that 886, well, you mentioned Washington, D.C. and a few cities in Massachusetts. My interest is in what can we pull from those experiences of those cities that mirror Philadelphia so that we can figure out how to make this work here. Have you all had that time to dig down and pull lessons from some of those other jurisdictions?
We have. So as part of our subcommittees, we've been looking at other models in other cities, but I don't know that we've done a really thorough comparison between cities of similar sizes and looked exclusively at that. I think we've kind of been looking at different policies and where they've worked in different places, but not sort of comparing city sizes. So we do have this study here, the Inclusionary Housing in the United States, Prevalence, Impact, and Practices, that has a list of the cities. So we can look through that and give you that information at some point.
Well, if you can make sure that the chair could get that for us, because as I said, it becomes a real it becomes real instruction for us on what we can do to make this right and to seek a win-win. So that would be very, very helpful.
Sure.
Councilman, if I could just add to that, if you know right now, or if you could let us know, I would say the top 10 or top 20 cities in America, how many have a program that you would call inclusionary housing? Do you know offhand? If not, maybe we...
That's not something I know offhand.
Okay,
George,
that's fine.
List of the top 10 cities that have the program?
They are, okay. All right. I understand Chicago, New York both have them.
I know there's a bunch in California. In the Northeast, I'm not...
No, I'm talking about size, George. I'm talking about, I think that's what the councilwoman was talking about, size. I understand New York, Chicago. That's okay. All right. If you get us that study, we'll distribute it to the whole committee. Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions?
I don't know.
Hold on 1 second. Councilman Squilla?
Yeah, one other question. And it seems like a lot of at least the people testifying in this panel, were interested in keeping the affordability in their communities. The affordability of the housing in the communities. Do you have is there a lot of CMX 3, 4, and 5 in those communities that would have the mixed income that would be able to keep that in those neighborhoods?
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again?
A lot of the people testifying were interested in keeping the affordability in their neighborhoods.
Right.
So is there a lot of the CMX 3, 4, and 5 in those neighborhoods that would enable this bill to work for those neighborhoods?
I think with the amendments, it has limited the areas where this bill would apply, unfortunately, but hopefully in the future it will expand to increase the number of areas where the program will apply and increase the affordable housing in those areas. So I think, we believe that with the amendments, it has limited the effectiveness of the program, but I think in the future, it makes sense to expand it and think about it in the context of the larger zoning code and the overlays and all of the different sort of unique characteristics for particular communities, I think.
But right now, it wouldn't. Right now, it would not.
I think some.
From what I'm aware of, no.
I believe there are some in Berrytown.
We'll put up a map. There is a map in your packet, but we'll put up the map on the screen so that you can see where it impacts right now.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you all very much. Ms. Marconi, our next group, please.
Rob Wonderling, Brian Emmons, Leo Amendato, and Carl Dranoff.
And gentlemen, as you're approaching, once again, 3 minutes, please. And if you have written testimony, the entirety will be made part of the record. So whoever would like to go first? There you go.
I'll go first. Good afternoon. My name is Brian Emmons, and I'm president of the Building Industry Association of Philadelphia, which represents the Philadelphia's region's residential home builders, residential contractors, and suppliers. Thank you, Chairman Greenlee and members of the Rules Committee, for the opportunity to speak before you today. I am here to testify regarding Bill number 170678, introduced by the Councilwoman Sanchez, in the culmination of months of thoughtful, extensive dialogue with BIA members and the Councilwoman and her staff and other stakeholders. We applaud the Councilwoman's willingness to take on this difficult problem and her desire to hear from different constituencies on a very complex issue. At the onset and throughout this process, the BIA has expressed a willingness to work together to create policies that will result in additional affordable housing in Philadelphia. There is no denying that our city's poverty rate is persistent and pernicious, where far too many cannot afford housing. There is also no denying that the effects of the Great Recession are still being felt in the way of rising rents and home prices with lingering stagnant wages. With that backdrop, we find ourselves here today debating an inclusionary housing bill. After the bill was originally introduced, the BIA opened up our books and commissioned a study providing actual economic evidence that this bill would not create additional affordable housing, but instead would, 1, severely harm the economic viability of market rate housing development in our city. 2, reduce construction jobs, which keep many of our families out of poverty. 3, lead to the deterioration of existing rental housing stock. And 4, ironically, over time, cause rents and home prices to increase citywide because new supply would be choked off. Mandating that all residential developments include an affordable component is doomed to fail in Philadelphia because the local market lacks any of the conditions necessary for it to succeed. Cities like New York, Chicago, Seattle, and San Francisco have active mandatory affordable housing programs, but they have also very high housing demand, allow a lot of density, and have very, very low housing supply. To the councilwoman's credit, she has listened to the many voices opposed to the bill and has proposed substantially modifying her legislation so that it would no longer apply to the entire city nor to the existing apartments and buildings. The BIA thanks her for these changes. Unfortunately, the bill as it is now proposed to be amended is essentially a very steep tax on Center City and University City, large-scale residential developments, the proceeds of which would go to the Housing Trust Fund.
All right, Mr. Evans, I have to ask you to finish up. As I said, that whole written testimony...
I'm getting close, I promise.
Okay.
In
Listen
return,
for
this
closing.
bill offers
Okay.
bonuses to developers, but they do not come close to economically offsetting this tax. Gone is any hope of the bill's original stated objective of creating mixed-income neighborhoods that nobody will be able to afford to build the units on. Instead, developers will either not proceed with these developments, except for a few that can make the numbers work on overly aggressive in lieu of payments.
All right, Mr. Evans, we want everybody to stay by the same rules. Okay, could you, who would like to speak next? Thank you, sir. And that, your whole statement will be made part of the record. That's why I said you don't have to read the whole statement. If we're down to trying to make everybody do 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Wunderlich?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, in particular Councilwoman Quinones, whose bill we've provided written testimony. I'll just provide a couple questions for this committee and ultimately City Council to consider along with the administration in analyzing this policy initiative around affordable housing. The facts are undeniable that we do have issues of deep-rooted poverty in this city. The facts are undeniable that we have very anemic job growth in this city. Approximately last year, we had over 100,000 Philadelphians job-ready, but a very small percentage of those jobs actually created. So striking the right balance between job creation and affordable housing policy, I think, is paramount for this committee. And therefore, on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia, perhaps the question should be how. How will this committee and this government know if enacted this policy is actually working and having an impact? How will this committee and this government know if it's not having an impact? And how will this committee and this government know if indeed it's had a negative impact of unintended consequences? I think these are the questions that really are before this body today at this hearing and ultimately through this legislative process. Really want to commend the Councilwoman for her deliberative nature in seeking stakeholder input, amendments recently introduced, and what we're hopeful is a process to continue to work towards the intent of a desired policy outcome. One would note that in conclusion, if the questions are answered as to negative impacts of this legislation or unintended consequences that have a deleterious effect on job creation or opportunities for residents to rent or own a home, then what would be the corrective action? Within a year or two or three, would this proposed legislation, once an ordinance, be subject to this council's Regulatory Reform Commission as chaired by Councilman Green and the council president? So I think those are the questions in summary that are before this group today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Please state your name and proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Greenlee. I'm Carl Dranoff, President and founder of Dranoff Properties. I have been developing in the city since 1982, and I'm a resident of Philadelphia, and I grew up in South Philadelphia and the lower northeast in a row home that was very affordable. And I don't think there's anyone on this panel today, and any of my colleagues who are testifying, that wouldn't love to see more affordable housing in the city. But Bill number 170678, while it has noble intent, is a very flawed bill. Why? It includes bonuses to stimulate affordable housing that are woefully insufficient to offset the burdensome costs which developers will incur. Developers will not be able to afford the onerous payments in lieu of options that are put forth. As a result, few, if any, Center City developers will build anything. If new housing development is stifled, as I believe it would be should this legislation become law, few, if any, affordable units or payments to the trust fund will result. The math is pretty simple. 100% of nothing is nothing. Even worse.
I think that was
Boy,
a little
that
quick.
3 minutes
Go-
went
We'll
past.
give you another minute, okay? Give you another minute.
I'm going to say that mandating affordable units in Center City condominium projects in particular makes no sense. The condo fees has been spoken to previously, $1 per square foot per month. So a 2,500 square foot, 3-bedroom condominium, the fee would be $2,500 per month. That far exceeds what most people could afford that are subject to the affordable housing limitations. I will conclude that we have, over the last 6 months, worked with Councilwoman Sanchez, and we presented 4 factual case studies showing the math on the bill's impact and why the bill is so detrimental. We have seen no such studies from the city or from the council. We would like to know the economic benefit analysis that should accompany this legislation. We're not even sure how many affordable housing units can be created or even what the goal is. And lastly, there are many better ways to tackle this goal. Some have been suggested by my colleagues. I ask the members of the Rules Committee to reject this proposed legislation and its enormous negative impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dranoff. Okay. Our clock here is not functioning real well, so it goes off in a minute, 4 minutes, 8 minutes, I don't know. Mr. Leo, you want to test? No? Okay. All right. Yeah, let me just ask one, and I know a couple other members. Is it fair to say you do believe there needs to be in some form a affordable or mixed income housing program in the city? Do you feel that's necessary for the city? Just, Mr. Dranoff?
I'm just speaking for myself, not for the BIA. I think if the city had an effective program that was broad-based, that was either voluntary with sufficient incentives to promote the affordable housing payments, or very broad-based, low impact fee, low tax, low burden, that is something that could also be considered.
Okay. Now, has that been presented as an alternative to this bill? Because I know you folks have been on the working
Yes,
committee.
many options were put on the table. Do you want me to recite some of them?
No, that's okay. You're saying you have
Yes.
that
The
incorporates
problem
some
with
of
the
the things you were
present
talking.
bill is that it's a very, very heavy burden on just a small part of the industry, basically Center City developers. It's very impractical, and it would basically cut off development and all the good things that come to the city, from the fees to the taxes, cleaning up blighted neighborhoods and sites, and jobs. And I think that's the unintended consequence here. So we have to figure out another way to do this.
Okay.
Councilman Greenlee, if I just may
Yeah.
also answer the question.
Just state your name for the record. Yeah.
Leo Adamando, also with the BIA. The part of Brian's testimony, which he didn't get to, given the time constraints, is the one solution that we did offer up, which is, I understand, not terribly popular with a lot of the neighborhood RCOs, is in fact meaningful density, height, and other zoning bonuses in the lower density residential zoning districts. It is the part of the bill that got eviscerated with these amendments, and we can set aside the debate around the mandate or not. There's one thing that's been proven throughout the country. If you want to create affordable housing on site, which is the original intent of this bill, you need to increase density, and not in CMX 3, 4, and 5, which are in the core, most dense part of the city already. It's in the neighborhoods. It's the only effective way to really address gentrification and to create on-site units, if that's the intent of the legislation. So that's been taken out of the bill. We think it's a shame. We think that we demonstrated that there are meaningful zoning bonuses that could be applied to lower density districts that with a voluntary program would create an actual profit incentive. I know it's a dirty word sometimes, but ultimately what you're trying to do is balance the profit motivation of the private market who builds housing at a lower cost with the public good. And the way to do that is not in CMX 3, 4, and 5. It's in every other part of the city, every other zoning designation except for CMX 3, 4, and 5. It's a shame those things got taken out of this bill. The bill as it currently stands doesn't address any of the issues that we're talking about in this room today.
I'd like to expand that. A couple years ago, Councilwoman Reynolds Brown actually took a proactive approach. She realized that it would be actually good for the economy to, and for the city to have more green roofs on projects. It's better for the sewer system. It's better for the earth. But instead of mandating that every single project in the city be built with a green roof, she met with developers. We sat down and we came up with a project, a density program that would incentivize developers by giving them just a little bit more density bonus to actually cover the cost. If you mandate these things and you make it a cost where people can't, make the numbers work and they decrease the profit. So since the councilwoman actually did that, in the past 2 years, over 50 projects have been built in the city with green roofs. That's proof right there that actually if we craft and draft something that actually provides an incentive for developers to do so, they'll do that. The BIA spent a lot of time working with Councilwoman Sanchez on proposing exactly what Leo just said, amendments to this legislation that would actually incentivize developers in all of the other zoning classifications that are not just immediately downtown Philadelphia.
Okay, all right, thank you for the answer. Councilwoman Sanchez and then Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, you have questions too?
Yeah,
Councilwoman Sanchez.
I want to thank all of you who've spent a lot of time around the table with this. So your assertion is that nothing's going to get built downtown, is that what you're saying? If this bill?
I think very little will get built. And I also want to point out that we're passing this bill in what we call boom times. Unfortunately, you can see from the gray hair or lack thereof that I have been through 3 or 4 cycles in the economy that were terrible. I remember in the 1980s, the boom was never going to end. Then we had big problems at the end of the 80s when the city was in deep distress. I remember in 2005 when I started Symphony House in boom times, and in 2008 when it was completed, we were in the Great Recession, and people weren't buying condos, they weren't leasing apartments, and it was a very difficult period. And we need to pass legislation that is just not a boom time. We need to have something that incentivizes and doesn't penalize developers from developing, because we want to create buildings and we want to create revenues for the city. But this legislation would discourage that very building, and especially if times turn bad, which inevitably they will, it could completely stifle development downtown for housing.
So if we pass it during boom time is bad, and if we try to do it during a market crash is bad, right? I mean, there's no good time to pass anything because there's always going to be a reason, right? So if we believe in mixed income housing,
Wrong.
the question is the how. You know, we talked a little bit around neighborhoods that opened up, and again, the bill's amendments reflect the work group product of very thoughtful, very smart people around the table around this. Is your assertion that these bonuses, which already exist in the code, are not going to be accessed if this bill doesn't pass? I mean, people are going to build and utilize the bonuses.
I think one of the first comments that we made in the first working group session that I was part of is that the bonuses in the current zoning code are inadequate and they only attack already dense zoning districts. There is one thing that almost every study of affordable housing, particularly inclusionary housing, has shown. It's that the one common thread between different size of cities, between different economic conditions, between different densities around the different cities is that you need to encourage density in order to create mixed income and affordable housing. This bill does not encourage density. CMX 3, 4, and 5 already has plenty of density. It's already in dense parts of town. So if you want to create a bill, good times or bad times, that works, I think you have to be much more thoughtful and take much more time to look neighborhood by neighborhood and figure out what might actually create affordable housing in those neighborhoods. This, as it currently stands, is simply a tax on large-scale residential development in Center City and University City. This isn't going to do one thing to create or foster mixed-income neighborhoods, if that's what the objective of the bill truly is.
So there is no formula by which, so let me step back. So do you think that hardworking folks and the AMIs established in this bill represent 62% of the city workforce? Do you not think that people who work for the city, teachers and others, should live downtown and have access to all the amenities that we subsidize downtown?
I think if you ask people who live outside of Center City if they want to live in Center City, you're not going to get a uniform answer of yes. I think a lot of people want to live in the neighborhoods they grew up in, where their community is, where their family, that's home for them. So I think that one of the fallacies of this bill from the very beginning has been that everybody wants to live in Center City. I just don't think that's true.
I don't think that was the premise of the bill. And you're right, we could have, and there's still part of evolving legislation is we need to look at a neighborhood to neighborhood districts. What we tried to do was respect the district process and allowing the district folks to look at how these incentives can work in neighborhoods. I represent 10 L stops. I welcome density, right, along those 10 L stops, but I can't build out affordability if we don't have access to additional resources, right? So you're weighing the two. So again, outside of that neighborhood piece, what is it about the amended version, other than your assertion that this is a tax for Center City, is currently missing?
One quick thing before we broach on that. The bill as proposed right now, as Leo says, we believe is a tax on Center City because all the parcels that are impacted by this legislation.
This map shows otherwise.
Okay,
As
people
upzone in neighborhoods as that development, it would apply, right?
Well, the big red circle right in the center is primarily Center City and the surrounding neighborhoods. And what you see, the spine is the L stops. That's 100% right. So we believe that what's going to happen, because the fees that are currently mandated right now are not economically offset by the density bonus. What you're going to see is everybody, all the developers actually go to all the other areas and purchase land there and develop there, which will make the gentrification claim and raise prices in the other neighborhoods. You got to remember that right now, which
is why the mandatory piece is important, right?
Yeah.
Because development will eventually, at some point, the core will be overdeveloped, and people are going to go into the neighborhoods, and they're going to upzone. And shouldn't we have a requirement as they upzone in the neighborhoods for affordability?
Shouldn't you upzone the?
If folks, you're saying that development is going to move to the neighborhoods, right?
Correct.
And they're going to want density in the neighborhoods.
Well, not as currently proposed. I mean, there's each one of those separate neighborhoods have zoning classifications and have limits that are respected.
If you need density to develop in the neighborhoods, wouldn't you be accessing and upzoning in the neighborhoods? And shouldn't we have an affordability requirement? Because eventually the development is happening in the neighborhoods. I mean, that's why you have the argument around affordability.
Well, I think we're talking about a couple different things here. Yeah, we're mixing a lot of different aspects. You know, one of the things that you know, we talked about earlier is the poverty rate in Philadelphia. And unfortunately for a lot of different reasons, Philadelphia, out of the 10 largest cities, has by far the largest poverty rate. We're also...
Of working folks. I mean, this council has been incredibly progressive around lifting the quality of life for security guards and others. That's what we're talking about. This bill, as currently written, is for 62% of the people that work for the city. These are public servants who can't afford. Otherwise, unless we address their AMI.
We agree with you. We just think this bill will stifle the math. Every project starts with math. It starts with bankers lending money into projects. It starts with people like me investing hundreds of millions of dollars in projects. And if you cannot get an economic return, Bill Rouse once told me you have to do well to do good. If you can't make an economic return, you're not going to take on the project and build the building. And presently, as this bill is construed, the payment in lieu of fees are extremely high. They would cost an inordinate amount of money, and they would discourage development, not promote development. And let's all get together and figure out what we can do to promote development and make the pie bigger instead of trying to take a sliver of a pie and making it smaller.
When we talk to bankers around this issue, how they're going to look at this is they're going to factor it into the whole total package, and we'll debate that back and forth. I just have one last question for the chamber, because in your testimony you talk about we need to put more money in the Housing Trust Fund. Where do you propose we get that?
Well, I think maybe Councilman Dom had stated earlier that if indeed this legislative body views this policy imperative as a core function of government, and I think as you just intimated, Councilwoman, as the bill's prime sponsor, you've prioritized concern for those city workers, those public employees around this matter. So then, to me, that is a sources and uses conversation that would require a broad-based revenue source. I think this council and the courts are still wrestling with targeted industry taxes that have been focused on various segments of our economy. We always have always had the basis of our principles around economic competitiveness, that if there is an argument to enhance a public service or to create a broader public good, then that should also be joined with a debate over broad-based taxes to fund such.
Thank you.
All right, thank you,
I know
Councilwoman.
the Blondo ones.
Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. A couple of questions. A thank you first to Brian Edmonds for the shout-out. But I would be remiss not to at least put on the record that I could not do that alone at all. That Jim Moransky, we worked like two peas in a pod trying to figure out how we could strike the delicate balance on that, increasing the incentive for those who wanted to do green roofs. Secondly, I would want to take a step back and say, looking again at the existing code where you had the bonuses for voluntary participation, we might not be here had more developers seized the moment and taken advantage of that bonus. And so with that said, I'd be curious to know from BIA, and I know you have not been there for a very long time, has the inclusionary bonus ever been on BIA's agenda in the past to remind developers that this is an effort that's here for you, take advantage of it, or we end up where we are now?
I think it's important to understand that the BIA as an organization does primarily represent residential developers who are more in the neighborhoods than they are in CMX 3, 4, and 5. The current legislation, the 2012 zoning code revision, included in certain CMX 3 situations and CMX 4 and 5 density bonuses. Most of the folks who are BIA members are not, they're not building high rises like Mr. Dranoff is building, or some of the other larger developers in town. So it has not necessarily been on the BIA's radar, the existing voluntary bonuses. Now, that said, the BIA did, well before this legislation was introduced, convene a workforce and affordable housing committee to begin to study how we, as more neighborhood developers, could help foster affordable housing development. The work product of that actually was presented to the working groups that Councilman Sanchez put together as part of debate, discussing this bill, and they're very focused on meaningful zoning bonuses in the neighborhoods that would create a profit incentive for residential developers to actually want to build the units on site. See, the holy grail here is not just the creation of affordable housing, but it's the creation of affordable housing at the lowest possible cost, okay? The highest cost affordable housing in the city of Philadelphia is that funded by federal tax credit programs, because it comes with all kinds of other strings, okay? And even with all the subsidy in the world, some of which comes from the Housing Trust Fund, you could put $100 million of the Housing Trust Fund, okay, and get much fewer units out the other end than if you create a real optional program that creates a profit incentive for developers, arguably not in CMX 3, 4, and 5, but in the neighborhoods where this issue is much more prevalent and pressing, okay? And given time, I do believe that even with certain RCOs, not being for this bill, I think in time we could craft programs that, and we could put the voluntary or mandatory, debate to the side for a second, okay? To get market rate developers who build cheaper than anybody else, okay, to build affordable housing units, you have to create a profit incentive. That's why we're market rate developers. We're in the business to make money, and that no one should begrudge that, okay? If you can create a framework where that exists alongside with affordable housing built, and ideally built on site, okay? There's a lot of good social outcomes that come from that. Then you can create good policy that actually can help the city. This bill, I understand its intentions. I understand that a lot of folks in this room want to solve the affordable housing problem. This bill does not solve the affordable housing problem. It could, in fact, exacerbate the problem, because as you tax development unduly in certain parts of town, which is what this bill does, you decrease development. Increase development, you increase housing starts. Decrease housing starts, the price of housing goes up. So perversely, this bill in its current form could actually serve to do the exact opposite of what it's intended to do.
My last and final question, thank you for the clarification. Mr. Wonderling, to the chamber, you open your comments by saying striking a delicate balance between affordable housing and job growth. So I'd like to pose to you the same question I posed to Ann Fedulin. Do you believe we have a tale of two cities here?
Well, absolutely. That is why this chamber, working hand in glove with members of this council and the administration, have been engaged in our Roadmap for Growth initiative. For example, we had over 200 businesses volunteer and spend time to learn best practices on how to hire vulnerable populations at the Free Library last week as they grow their enterprises in the city. Vulnerable populations are those that are heavily subsidized with TANF, homeless individuals, citizens reentering from prison life, returning veterans, and panhandlers. That is action, not just words.
So that's on the job growth side. On the affordable housing, has that ever been an agenda item at the Chamber of Commerce?
This chamber is committed to a whole range of issues around quality of life. We've been engaged in the working group with the prime sponsor. We're presenting our remarks today for the record and comment. When I say a balancing act, it's an undeniable fact that this city may be growing slightly in population, but is being outpaced by metropolitan regions in job creation. We had over 100,000 job-ready Philadelphians last year and barely filled about 20,000 net jobs on payrolls. The job will ultimately be the coin of the realm, and I think that this legislative body should be prudent when on any policy initiative, from affordable housing to wellness to zoning to you name it, in balancing, always seeking to strike the balance between free enterprise and job creation and a policy imperative. In this case, the policy, again, well-intended, and I don't think anybody at this table has disagreed with the fundamentals, needs to be addressed in a very public way. This is a great hearing and a great step in the process to do so.
Your remarks are well taken. Where I would philosophically disagree with you is that us figuring it out is not a me thing, the me being Philadelphia City Council. Us figuring out, in my personal opinion, and we all have one, should be a we thing, with the chamber walking hand in foot with council so that we get this right in a way that does not negatively impact, I would say, a segment of your membership that includes developers and business people that are also members of the chamber. Is that correct?
Sure, and also I think we have to be careful not to be overly parochial. You've taken an oath to serve the citizens of this city, and we applaud that, and we applaud your public servants, your public service. But the fact of the matter is that the 6 million or so residents that are in the greater Philadelphia region that work in this economy beyond the city borders, about 60% of those that work in this city and the greater Philadelphia region change their zip codes daily. They leave their place of residence, they move to a different zip code for their place of business and return that night. We have a mobile economy that is regional in scope and global in impact, and that's part of the balancing act. And we look forward to working with you, the chair of this committee and the bill's prime sponsor, to strike that balance.
And again, for the record, the chamber was a part of the work groups, correct?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. No other questions? Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you. Wait a minute. You have a question? Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. The council president has a question. Council President Clark.
Sorry. Just happened to be walking by. I know some of you wish I kept walking. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Just one real quick thing. And as you know, we all care very dearly about affordable housing and a number of things in the city. We care about the growth of the city. We care about our city in general. But there is a significant issue in what we're seeing when we talk about the tale of two cities, so to speak, and that gap is widening. The simple reality is this not in the city of Philadelphia, but this whole issue with respect to affordability as it relates to living, which is probably the most significant expense that one can incur, a family, more than a car, more than anything else that person would spend, is your ability to live in a particular unit, be it for sale or be it rental. There are limitations significant in terms of what a local legislative body can do. As much as we'd like to affect the economy, we're somewhat limited because we just don't have money. We don't have the ability to craft policy as it relates to import, exports, offshoring, jobs, all the other things that have to be done on a national level. But we do have some ability on a local level to deal with a person's ability to live in a unit. Years ago, I guess I was a freshman. Who else was here? I think Councilman Greenlee and Councilwoman Brown were here when they crafted either in staff capacity or some way. We crafted a 10-year tax abatement. Initially, I think it was a 3, and then a 5, and then a 10. And that was something that we did locally to stimulate housing. And I'm sure all of you would say at this point it's relatively successful. So similarly, on the other side of the equation, on a local level, it's our responsibility to try to craft something on a local level, something that we have some level of jurisdiction on, to stimulate affordable housing. So that's why you see proposals like this, and that's why you see workforce housing initiatives, all of the things that we can do locally. So, and I'm not here to preach to you, but I'm just simply saying that, just like we created the 10-year tax abatement, and I'm not going to talk about getting rid of it today, or changing it or altering it, because we're not here for that today. But we also should need to talk about, on a local level, the ability to deal with affordable housing. I mean, there is a significant shortage of affordable housing in our country, in our state, and in our city. And it may get even worse if the tax bill that is being rushed through the Senate eliminates the ability to have 4% credits and all the other things that help. So we have to look at it, because at the end of the day, people that need affordable housing, we are all they have. And we're asking your industry to work with us to try on a local level to help stimulate more affordable housing. And I agree that when you're trying to do something as significant as this, it's difficult. You know, we did the creating the new Department of Planning and Development. It took us a year and a half, right, just to get that passed. And we weren't talking about taking money out of anybody's pocket, but just to change in the structure of how we did things around here. So I just want to weigh in and encourage you guys at a very significant level to please work with us to come up with a strategy, because in the district that I represent, probably the most diverse district in the state, it is genuinely the tale of two cities on the northern part of my district versus the southern part. And I see a lot of pain on the northern part because people just simply don't have the ability to live in an affordable unit and a quality unit. So we really have to figure this out. So I'm just encouraging. I want to thank the prime sponsor for doing and taking on this very, very Herculean task, and all the members of the committee for continuing this. So this weighing in, probably going to exit unless you had a question with me. Mr. Drainoff, yeah.
I just want to say, from speaking for myself, we are eager to continue to work with City Council and with the Councilwoman on a bill that's workable, that doesn't hurt people, that can create jobs and create the very funds that you're looking for. I think that there's probably better ways to do it than this bill. Maybe this bill can be amended or changed, or maybe there's a completely different way to do it. A few council people have alluded to that earlier today in the testimony. And we want to be part of the equation. And I've been here for my whole life, 69 years, and developing in the city for 42 years. And I want to see the city prosper and be the best that it can be, because I live here and I'm vested in this city. And we need to work together where everyone's a winner and there's not winners and losers.
I understand.
Okay.
I wasn't.
No, I just want to echo.
Please,
I want to
quickly.
echo what Carl said. You know, you said earlier it's difficult for you to create jobs, and I think when you go around all the city's different neighborhoods right now, and you see construction in a lot of neighborhoods, you see thousands of people that are working, and you know, there are people from painters to drywall people to real estate agents, to every trade that actually needs that you need in order to construct a building. But the great thing is after we actually get these people moving into the community, then we create more jobs, because then we have a need for restaurants and supermarkets and coffee stores and like all the things that people need as life services once they get there. So we do understand there's a need for affordable housing, and we absolutely believe there's a path forward here. We just got to make sure that we walk this path together hand in hand, because I don't think either of us want to be sitting there saying, you know what, we shouldn't have done that, we made mistakes, and we put a lot of people that are currently working out of a job to the point where, you know, we make the poverty issue in Philadelphia even worse. So we commend the entire council for their efforts on this, and we do believe there's a path forward.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that it's not the intention of anybody on this committee and in this council to eliminate jobs. We've done anything but. We've reduced wage taxes a gazillion dollars over the last several years, a couple of decades. I mean, we've done what we needed to do. We're currently working with Mr. Wunderling in the chamber about a job initiative, but at the end of the day, if a person doesn't have a place to live, everything else is extremely difficult. If I don't have a stable location, I can't get that call back from somebody who is going to offer me a job. If I don't have a stable location, my ability to have my children educated adequately in a particular neighborhood school, I mean, all those things feed off of, at the end of the day, the place where I live. So we will work with you and continue to
We
work.
agree. Nobody
But
wants.
we gotta create an affordable environment in the city of Philadelphia, and we've done what we can do, and we appreciate some of the things you've done, but this is like as significant, if not more so, than anything else we can do, separate and aside from the educational side.
Nobody wants a better Philadelphia than we do.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Council President. No,
Sorry.
That's okay. You said it well. Thank you. There are no other questions. Again, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Ms. O'Connell, who's our next group here?
Beth McConnell.
Second group, the group.
Panel 4, Alan Maclock and Andrew Fishkoff.
Once again, try this again. Any written testimony will be part of the record. Got 3 minutes, please.
Great.
Please,
Good afternoon,
McConnell,
Chairman
please
Greenlee.
proceed.
The timer?
Go ahead. Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Greenlee and other members of the committee. My name is Beth McConnell. I'm the Policy Director at the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations, PACDC, and we're here to testify in support of the amended Bill 170678. I'm going to summarize my testimony, and I'm going to respond to some of the things I've heard today that are not included in my written testimony. But I do want to start by saying that we will not achieve an equitable Philadelphia without equitable development policies. We are building the Philadelphia today for future generations. Policymakers face a choice of using planning and development to deepen and reinforce inequality or to create neighborhoods of opportunity for all Philadelphians regardless of income. That we subsidize high-end luxury market rate development through the 10-year tax abatement while turning away low-income families that are desperate for affordable homes is a policy, and it is a policy of inequality. The amendments that were offered to the bill give the developers flexibility to comply. It narrows the applicability to the zoning districts where we're seeing the most expensive rents and record-breaking sales prices. It's likely we'll see fewer on-site units and more fees in lieu paid as a result. That's not an ideal balance, but it's also still a good outcome. I just want to remind council members that the Housing Trust Fund resources are not only used to prevent homelessness, also repair the existing housing stock, as well as create new affordable units in every part of the city. We are disappointed that the amendments narrow the bill's applicability to only a handful of zoning districts, excluding entire neighborhoods where we're seeing significant appreciation in real estate prices and where the threats of displacement are real. And we hope we can work with stakeholders and council to expand the program and policy to more neighborhoods in time. Now, developers have argued that this will kill development in the city by making it financially infeasible. But again, the compromise was to focus this bill on the neighborhoods where we have the highest real estate sale prices and rents. There's also been a significant amount of research that has been done, academic research that's been done on these kinds of programs from other cities, and they do not find that development is deterred or that sale prices go up largely. They found little to no effect, I should say. We can provide you with some of those studies. And again, I want to point out, as we heard, hundreds of jurisdictions have policies just like that. Builders still build and lenders still lend. These are big cities and small towns. They are rural, urban, and suburban. In fact, Pittsburgh is now considering a similar policy that applies citywide, tying to the tax abatement as the bonus, as the density, as the incentive, I should say. So we really would like to work with council to see if we could investigate deepening this policy to more neighborhoods. The kind of final point I want to make is that the bill is not perfect. It represents significant compromise from the original proposal, and it's not the only solution given the overwhelming large need of our low-income neighbors for safe, affordable homes. But it's an important first step forward in enlisting developers that build wealth from rising rents and home sale prices and contributing to addressing needs for more affordable homes. And we want to thank Councilwoman Sanchez for pushing this conversation, for Council President, Council Members Blackwell and Johnson, also for co-sponsorship and their hard work on this policy over the last 6 months. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. My name is, my name is Alan Malik, and I'm a senior fellow with the Center for Community Progress in Washington, and I have studied inclusionary housing and worked with communities to develop inclusionary programs since the 1980s, and have written a number of books on the subject as well. And I think I am here to speak in favor of the proposed legislation. I think there are a lot of good reasons for it. It will not solve the affordable housing program, but it will help. It will add a certain number of affordable housing units to the city's stock, which are desperately needed. And I'd add, even though sales prices in Philadelphia on the average are low, rents are not. And many, many renters in the income ranges provided by this bill are suffering from extreme housing cost burdens in this city, and their numbers are rising steadily. Secondly, it will provide at least some units of affordable housing in high opportunity areas, areas with good public services and access to jobs. And third, it has important symbolic value for the city to indicate that we're all in this together, that this should not be a city of rich people and poor people living separately in segregated communities. So I think it has a lot of value in all of those respects. And over the recent years, we've seen a lot of inclusionary housing emerge in cities. And it's not just the hot markets like New York, Boston, and Seattle. Chicago is actually very similar to Philadelphia, as a city with a strong market in some areas, a middle market in others, and a very weak market elsewhere. Chicago has had an inclusionary ordinance, not unlike the one before you, over the last few years. Over the last 8 years, approximately 2,000 units of affordable housing have been created in Chicago as a result of their inclusionary program. It's not a huge number, but it's not nothing. Now, one thing, and I agree with Beth, the majority of those units have been created through in lieu fees rather than in the developments which created the obligation. And that is likely to happen under the proposed legislation. But some percentage, about 20%, are in the projects which created the obligation. The others are in lieu fees. They are scattered throughout the city. Many of them are in areas of opportunity, areas which are growing, which are providing jobs and good public services. So I would say that is a success. Other cities like Nashville and Charlotte have enacted inclusionary ordinances where the median rents are actually lower than those in Philadelphia. Portland, Newark recently enacted an ordinance. Atlanta recently enacted an inclusionary ordinance. This is not simply something for elite cities, but something that can work wherever there is a reasonably strong market in part of the city.
Sir, if I could,
pardon?
I want to be fair to everybody. Our clock is not working, but the 3 minutes are up, so.
Okay, I'd like to.
If I could ask you to move on, if I could ask
sure.
to move on to the next
Okay.
person, I appreciate it.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for the information, though.
And I have written comments.
Okay, please. They'll be submitted. Yes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is Andrew Frischkopf, Director of the Philadelphia Local Initiative Support Corporation, also known as LISC. I will also try to summarize and be brief. On behalf of LISC, I want to thank Councilwoman Quinones-Sanchez and the other sponsors for their leadership in support of affordable housing and inclusionary zoning in Philadelphia. And I would like to thank PACDC and the other advocates who continue to champion the cause of affordable and inclusionary housing. LISC is a leading national and local community development financial institution. In addition to investing more than $400 million in Philadelphia's homes and neighborhoods, LISC has taken a local leadership role in preserving affordable homeowner and rental housing. We've also provided planning, technical assistance, and funding support to CDCs and others who champion equitable and inclusionary development. As such, we understand and support the intent of the sponsors of Bill 170678. No one in this chamber can ignore that we have a lack of affordable housing in Philadelphia. Recent estimates indicate that we need 66,000 more affordable homes and apartments to meet demand. And I don't mean to contradict a statement from a member of the council, but to clarify on the recent eConsult study that Councilman Dom quoted, the report focuses on what's affordable for people who are at $30,000 and above, not at $30,000 annual income and below. That leaves 600,000 Philadelphians who earn $30,000 a year or less who are not addressed in the eConsult report. These are workers, retirees, children, people with disabilities, and others. And the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia has found that in the past 15 years, we have lost 23,000 homes that were affordable to people in that income category, below $30,000 a year. In the next few years, we may lose as many as 14,000 publicly assisted affordable apartments. These were the rental apartments that Ms. Fadulin had referenced in her testimony. Certainly, we should look to double time the increased incomes in Philadelphia. But our housing policy cannot be to wait until we magically increase wages, Social Security, SSI, and child support. Also, one key component of any earned income policy must be inclusionary housing near job centers and within transit-oriented development districts. Bill 170678 offers a first step in that direction. LISC understands that there are many concerns about the bill as it has been amended, and we sympathize with those concerns. We are also aware of concerns expressed about unintended consequences of the bill to fragile overlays, such as the Central Delaware overlay. We call upon all concerned parties to work together to improve the bill, not just oppose it. We encourage all parties to build momentum for affordable and inclusionary housing measures beyond the scope of this bill. Now is the time to reform the 10-year tax abatement as an equitable development tool, to commit funds for preserving endangered affordable rental housing, and now is the time to dedicate local funds for rental vouchers for those lower-income people who could use it in apartments near job centers.
All right.
Health
Thank you, sir.
facilities.
Thank you. Trying to be fair to everybody here. Mr. Wright, is that right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please identify yourself and proceed. Thank you. Mr. Mack, stay there a second because I had a question. Please.
James Wright from the People's Emergency Center. I'm the Director of Community, Economic, and Real Estate Development there. We are a comprehensive social services agency in West Philadelphia. We nurture families, strengthen neighborhoods, and drive change. We've developed over the years with the help of LISC and commerce and planning and all the different tax credit sources, over 260 affordable housing units in West Philly. We are right smack dab in the middle of the West Philadelphia Promise Zone, and we see a significant housing cost burden to about 50 to 60% of residents in that area. The same study that Andrew talked about, the Federal Reserve study, talks about three census tracts in the West Philly Promise Zone that are the fastest growing in terms of housing loss. About 800 or 900 units are going to be lost really soon to the increase in housing costs. And also couple that with a tax increase, which has come to the neighborhood because of the gentrification and the revitalization and reassessment. So people in the neighborhood are having to deal with no increase in wages or job loss, and then increase in values because of the proximity to those highly increasing economic centers of University City and Center City. And so I am in support of the bill, and I would love to see the Rules Committee move the bill forward. It is a good start. It's not the full measure of what we need in Philadelphia to really stabilize, to ensure stable housing and also economic health for families, but it's a very good step in that direction. So I think this is a good thing to keep moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Appreciate your time. Mr. Bauer, quick question. You mentioned Chicago, okay? And I think what's important here, obviously we want affordable housing, but obviously one of the goals of this bill is to have mixed income housing, get people, or maybe people who have a chance that grew up in the neighborhood, a shot to stay in there, which I think is one of the goals. So in the Chicago study, was there some of that where people that actually, let me use an example, a Francisville-like neighborhood, like I border, that people who grew up in that area were able to maybe stay there through a program like this?
Unfortunately, I really can't answer that question from the information they provide. But if I could say, I think it's important, if this Philadelphia adopts this bill, is to develop guidelines for use of the in lieu payments so that they can go to create some of those opportunities and perhaps be targeted to some of the neighborhoods which are seeing that kind of income growth today, but are not included in the areas subject to the ordinance.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah,
in the other cities where they've adopted this, did you see what some of the folks from the industry say, a total stall of development? Did these cities stop building?
No.
How did they adjust?
Well,
What did you see? What trends? Because I know with Chicago, they had to come back and be more aggressive because...
Okay. One thing, and this has happened in Chicago, in DC, in a lot of places, the initial ordinance is amended, that people see how it works, people try to make it work, people adjust it, and I'm sure that if you enact this legislation, that in a couple of years, perhaps even sooner, there will be amendments, and that is to be expected and not a problem. But I think, to put it mildly, in a vernacular, people sharpen their pencils. People figure out how to make things work. I was working in New Jersey when the Mount Laurel decision all but mandated inclusionary zoning. This is back in the 80s in New Jersey. And again, the consensus was from the developers, it can never happen, it will never work, we can't do it. Once it was clear that it was the way future development opportunities were going to be created, people figured out how to make it work. In the long run, economists tell us, and I believe this, it's going to be, some of these costs are going to be passed backwards. In other words, the price for raw buildable land, the price for empty buildings, will probably go down slightly to reflect the fact that there is this additional obligation that's been placed on the developments. But mainly, I think that the pencils will be sharpened, and I think it's important that the legislation include whatever measures there can be to make sure that the developers are not unduly burdened by the legislation. So I think there are elements in it, for example, like requiring that the units be the same size, that are probably actually not necessary and potentially problematic. I think you want to give developers as much certainty as you can about exactly what the requirements are and what they have to do to comply and what they have to do with the affordable units. And finally, I think you should encourage, rather than simply expect the developers to be responsible for the marketing and the income certification, or the city, I would encourage something in the legislation to provide for third parties, qualified, particularly nonprofit third parties doing that work. Most developers do not want to get involved, in my experience, in certifying people's incomes, in marketing in areas where they're not familiar with, in recertifying over time, in dealing with re-rentals or resales in the future and so forth. And provisions that encourage use of qualified third parties, I think would make it easier for the developers and for the city, for that matter.
Thank you. One last thing. In terms of the financing, what have you seen happen in other places around the financing?
I'm sorry,
in terms of the financing, one of the concerns is none of the projects will pencil. You talked about people sharpening their pencils. Is there any one, two things that you've heard from the banking industry as it relates to their financing of similar projects?
No, I don't think there is a fundamental financing problem. I think if a developer comes in with a project that pencils out, as they say, it will be financeable. The banks have gotten used to inclusionary housing. It's been around by now in this country, in different parts of this country, for 50 years. It's not new, it's not revolutionary. So I think at this point, at least, banks, for whatever reason, have a very big appetite for financing upscale multifamily rental developments. I don't know whether it's permanent, but at the moment it's the reality in the market. And I think, again, if the numbers work, they'll finance it.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Before I recognize Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, I just think of something our former colleague, Councilwoman Tasco, said, that she sat here for a long time and heard on many issues the end of the world was coming, and last she checked, the world hasn't ended yet. So I don't think the world will end when we finally work this situation out either. Councilwoman Reynolds Brown?
Yes, and in the interest of the sponsor who I'm confident wants to get this right, as a former teacher, I'm always looking for lessons learned. So I would ask that Ms. Beth McConnell, if you could please make sure that we get the Pittsburgh model that ties affordable housing to tax abatement so that we can see how what it was, how it worked, lessons learned, takeaways.
Yeah, and the Pittsburgh is a proposal. The City
a
Council of
proposal.
Pittsburgh is considering a policy like this right now. A report was recently released as a result of some working groups and some studies there that recommended a citywide policy tied to the tax abatement, serving renters at 50% area median income and owners at 80% area median income. I do think that one of the lessons learned from looking at other cities is that certainly when you narrow the applicability of a program to a limited number of zoning districts, it's really easy for a developer to just build in another zoning district, right? We know that. And that is unfortunate, and I understand it is a political compromise that had to be reached in order to get a program started, to get something up and running, and in time we would look at potentially expanding it. But that is one lesson learned from other jurisdictions. And I will just close by saying that what we're seeing in city after city is that they're toughening their policies, not weakening them. New York City went from a voluntary program with very generous bonuses, other zoning bonuses as well, and they just made it mandatory. Chicago strengthened their program as well and toughened the in lieu payments, and they're actually considering now no longer even requiring in lieu payments, but requiring all units be on site. So we're seeing that more and more and more in other cities is moving is in that direction in this particular housing market.
That information will be very instructive, so if you can see that the chair gets that for us.
Sure.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Detroit even just passed, Detroit City Council just passed a policy as well.
Okay. Yeah, whatever you can get us that deals with this issue. We've got a lot of information already. We're always ready for more. Okay. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you call our next panel, please? We're moving on here.
Stephen Huntington, Brandy Bones, Meg Greenfield, Celeste Hardnester, Ian Wilson.
Ian Wilson? Yeah. How many we got here?
So, Brandy Bones had to leave and Celeste Hardester has to leave. So that would eliminate testimony from Chestnut Hill and Bella Vista.
Okay.
I do have written comments. I don't have enough copies to hand up, but I'll give them by
You just
email.
put it in, that's all.
Just one
Yeah.
for the record.
Yeah, just put it in. Okay, so we still have 5 people here?
Councilman Greenlee, I added, Steve sent this weekend, and I added today 2 names that I still didn't hear.
Well, we got a whole lot more names that haven't got called yet. I got to stick with these 3 right
Sir,
now, and then we'll call the names that were called. So we got Huntington, Greenfield, and Wilson, okay? That's all I can do right now, okay? And then the other folks will work back to you, okay? Steve, please, identify yourself.
My name is Steve Huntington. I'm here testifying on behalf of the Crosstown Coalition, which is a federation of 30 civic associations which have banded together to address community issues. At the outset, we have 2 general comments. First, this bill was delivered less than 2 working days ago on Monday, November 20th at 5:08 p.m. We believe it's not ready for prime time. It should be tabled and reviewed over a 75-day period per a request we made to the sponsor on November 6th. Second, we make this request even though we support mixed income in neighborhoods throughout the city. Each neighborhood should have a mixed income component. It's frustrating to be asked to testify this morning in the presence of an elephant in the room. And the elephant in this room is that the committee expects reasoned comments from citizens on a bill which was delivered less than 2 business days ago, business days bracketed by the Thanksgiving holiday. Reasoned comment is expected on a bill which is sufficiently complex that 3 working groups met over a 3-month period on a dozen occasions, more than a dozen occasions really, to discuss the bill's subject matter. And the elephant in the room is not sort of a tame petting zoo pachyderm. It exhibited rogue behavior at the Planning Commission last Tuesday, November 21st. The Planning Commission was given less than 24 hours heads up to deliver on this bill. This is an attempt to do away with the city charter's provisions, ensuring that on land use matters, council will have the benefit of the real estate expertise provided by the Planning Commission. To its credit, the Planning Commission sidestepped this approach and endorsed its staff recommendation that this bill be tabled. We join that recommendation. To her credit, Councilwoman Sanchez deployed the working group approach to address the many issues involved. That's an outreach effort that's rarely seen, and we applaud it. Even so, over the 3-month working group period, not a word of the bill was revised. Further, no minutes have been delivered of the working group sessions, so Rules is being asked to deliberate without an account of a local lending officer's description of the bill's impact on housing as, and I quote, catastrophic. Testimony which is unrebutted. And Rules is also being asked to proceed without the benefit of the working group input from the CDCs and community legal services as to the characteristics and dimensions of gentrification occurring in neighborhoods which contain few, if any, of the zoning categories targeted in the current bill. So Rules has two options here. It can acknowledge the frustration generated by the elephant in the room and table this bill so that it can be properly analyzed over a 75-day period, enabling Crosstown's members and other RCOs to discuss this bill at their monthly meetings, and affording other stakeholders the opportunity to assess the revised bill. Alternatively, Rules can act like the blind man and the elephant and assume that today's proceedings has afforded citizens the opportunity to engage meaningfully in Bill 170678. I don't see the rush here. Council addressed affordable housing in 2007 in Bill 071005. It's waited 10 years to propound this bill, 170678. I just don't see the rush.
Okay. Who else? Who would like to go next? Please identify yourself and proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and our district councilman, Councilman Squilla, my name is Kim Williams, and I am a vice president of the Society Hill Civic Association. I'm here with Roseanne Loesch, our president.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Who?
I'm Kim Williams, vice president of the Society Hill Civic Association.
Society Hill. You were down the list. Was your name called? I'm trying to be fair to everybody here that was on the list.
Sure.
What I heard was Stephen Huntington, Meg Greenfield, and Ian Wilson is the names I heard.
Well, Councilman, I did email you on Friday afternoon with a list which included Society Hill and mentioned Mr.
And they're probably
Hill.
on the list. What I'm saying is we're trying to vary this.
Yeah, but Society Hill didn't get on your list, is what I'm saying. The names, all the names on the email were
Okay.
not.
And some of them are at the end. We're trying to balance this out.
All right.
Okay? Everybody that wants to go is going to get called. It's just I'm trying to balance this out to be fair, because there's people who know they're on the list, and to have people jumping up in front of them isn't fair. Please, identify yourself.
I think it's afternoon now, so good afternoon, and
Yeah,
thank
it
you
is.
for the
Well into it.
opportunity to testify about something that, frankly, for all the reasons Mr. Huntington has stated,
Just state your name for the record.
Meg Greenfield, we don't know very much about yet and haven't had a chance to study. So I'm a little bit in a quandary about how to proceed, except to tell you that I welcome, I think, the limitations that have been put through in the amendments, but I don't think they address the problem. One of my concerns is that whether we're building in Center City or East Falls or Manayunk or Southwest Philadelphia, the costs of construction aren't going to change. But the value in the market, of the properties that will be rented or sold will vary according to the neighborhood. And so the burden you're putting on particular individual neighborhoods is greater and will become a disincentive for construction. I am also concerned about the impact on the carefully worked out compromises and decisions made when we reworked the zoning code a few years ago. We spent a lot of time and effort in doing that. And at this point, I, for one, and our zoning committee, and I'm a member of that committee and a past chair, have not had an opportunity to study the impact on the code provisions of this bill. I agree that this bill would, at best, be held. We support affordable housing. We have affordable housing in East Falls. We have public housing in East Falls. We have Section 8 housing in East Falls. And we have a very wide range of diversity economically, racially, education, and everything else. But I can tell you that there's one project in East Falls which has been stymied for years. It's along the river. It's a piece of prime property. It's known as the Rivage site. Currently, the person who has the rights to develop that property is Mr. Grasso. He came in with a proposal which asked for greater height than was allowed by the code. He had that proposal passed. It's been more than a year. Not a shovel has hit the ground. And it is my understanding, and I don't know this to be absolutely the case, that he is about to come back to and say, I want to lower the height of the building. I can't find tenants, and this is a CMX area, and we're talking about CMX 3, 4, and 5, to occupy the commercial space. And this is a real problem. We can write it in and say, do it, but it doesn't mean you can find the tenants or afford the cost of going higher without, you will price yourself out of the market in many communities, including ours. And this is not one of the distressed communities about which we're all concerned. So I ask you to consider the impact, and speaking of impact, consider alternative means to achieve your goals, rather than mandating this kind of uniform payment of $11,000 to $35,000 or $40,000 per unit if a developer decides not to take advantage of the bonuses. The bonuses may not make sense.
Ms. Greenfield.
And the
okay.
cost is
We're up.
too. All right.
3 minutes. 3 minutes are up. I'm sorry. This clock is not working well. Sir, I'm sorry. There's been 2 different lists given to me. Society Hill is on one of the lists, so please, if you'd like to go now, just identify yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kim Williams. I'm a Vice President of the Society Hill Civic Association. I'm here with Roseanne Loesch, our President. As I will describe, we support the goal of affordable housing, but we are opposed to Bill number 170678. At the conclusion of my remarks, we make a specific request. The Society Hill Civic Association is one of the oldest civics in Philadelphia for the most historic neighborhood in the country. Our association has over 1,100 dues-paying members in an all-time high, representing owners and tenants in townhomes, condominiums, and apartments. Many of our residents are seniors. We support the goal of increasing the affordability of housing in Philadelphia. A diversity of incomes makes a community more inclusive and equitable. We support strong, effective laws and programs to make housing more affordable. But we are opposed to this particular bill. We are opposed because...
And to work. So I want whatever legislation is looked at about housing and representing all of the people should be including people with disabilities, because given opportunities, we can thrive and we have rights. And I represent the community, and speaking for not just myself, but for all people with disabilities. We have a large population of people with disabilities in this Philadelphia area, and they need to be recognized as citizens as well. So whatever legislation and whatever you're looking at when you're talking about housing, don't forget the disability community.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Who would like to go next? Sir?
All right. My name is Sterling Johnson. I am representing Mental Health Partnerships, formerly the Mental Health Association of Southeast Pennsylvania. I'm also a resident of Philadelphia and a member of the recovery community here. You should support the affordable housing legislation for two reasons. There's substantial need for seniors, people with disabilities, LGBT and African American youth, and those who have experienced intimate partner violence, and the fact that this is an appropriate response to the city's affordable housing problem. First, my organization, Mental Health Partnership, supports individuals with severe mental health conditions. I care about affordable housing because I see these, this is a constant issue of people that are experiencing homelessness, disabled, and are on public benefits. The SSI monthly benefit is $735 a month. That's not enough to live on. These individuals, they're dependent on becoming part of the affordable housing system. As a person in recovery, I know people that are only qualified for housing only after they were homeless for a number of years. They had to qualify as chronically homeless, so even when they were ready to get help for their mental health or substance use disorder, they were turned away until they had sufficiently suffered in our system. So, and even in the most extreme cases, the wait is too long. One woman that is a participant, she was blinded while she was pregnant. She had to stay in the hospital for 3 months. She was only recently able, after a year, able to find housing for her and her child. These cases are things I see on a daily basis. The fact of the matter is that we need to increase the amount of affordable housing that is in our city. We need housing first programs also because of people with mental health conditions and substance use disorders. More than 1,000 people are going to die in our city. I'm tired of going to funerals. I'm sure all of you have been to them for people that have died due to the opioid crisis. In terms of us, there's urgency in the recovery community for more affordable housing, so I would say that we need to act fast on this and not wait. Anybody I talk to believes that there is urgency. It's homelessness at a crisis level, even with, I mean, with the clearing out of certain areas of the city, we've seen increases in other parts of the city due to the opioid crisis. Just in general, from NYU's Furman Center study, we know that this does not change the amount of rated development in cities, and I just want you to know that you need to support this legislation as I go to hearings on the eviction crisis. Tomorrow I will be at a panel on African American youth homelessness, on LGBT youth homelessness. I will be, I go to opioid crisis hearings all the time, and all of them converge at the amount of affordable housing in this city. So we need, whatever way that that can happen, we need to increase the amount of funds that are in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So I just want to thank you for your time, for even making this a conversation. Definitely appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Please, identify yourself, proceed.
My name's Nora Lichtash, but Constance Morrow had to get called out.
Your time's up. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Greenlee. So I'm going to read her testimony, if that's okay, because she really wanted it in. I live on the 2300 block of Germantown Avenue, which is in the 7th District. I've been living there for 37 years, and I'm here today to testify about Bill 170678. I'm a board member of the Women's Community Revitalization Project. I'm a block captain, a grandparent, and I serve on other boards in my community. I'm here today with the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities. I talk to a lot of people in my neighborhood, and they talk about needing affordable housing. Just to get by, they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. What I mean by that is that if they pay the rent, they can't pay their utilities, food, or medicine. It's already too expensive, and I'm worried development will make it worse. Close to my neighborhood, there's a lot of development. Gentrification is knocking on my door. Every day I come home, and there's a type of letter at my house asking to buy my house. If this bill is passed, we want to make sure that the requirements stay mandatory, that the affordability requirement is, right now it says 50 years, but we want to see that affordability requirement as long as possible because neighborhoods change and we need affordable housing in neighborhoods, and that the fee for the Housing Trust Fund stays clearly outlined in the legislation. We want to say we're happy to see that a bill that could put resources into the Housing Trust Fund. We like the Housing Trust Fund because it serves the poorest people in our city, the people who need the support the most. We're asking you to stand with us to make sure that we have the resources our communities deserve to keep the city of brotherly and sisterly love affordable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Hold on one second. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you all very much. Thank you for your time. Ms. Marconi, call our next panel, please.
Nilda Ruiz, Phil Lord, Lisa Rivera, Joseph Jambel, Stephanie Selden.
Well, that's true, too. No. All right, how many people we have here? All right, I see Nilda, okay. Phil Lord, is he here? No? Okay. Lisa Rivera, that's you, okay. I just want to make sure we're on the right. Joseph Jampel, okay. Stephanie, I see. I think that's it for this panel, sir. I think that's it for this panel.
Yeah, I was told by Eric Bosman I was supposed to be on this panel. Is Sarah Young?
You were in another panel. She's here. She's in an earlier panel.
Okay, all right, okay. Oh, Sarah Young, okay, all right. I'm sorry, did you put your name in, or? Yes.
Joe Schiavo, I thought.
I think you're in the next group, right? You're in the next group. You're not in this group. You're in the next group, yes. Yes. All right? There's still some more people to be called, so just hang in there. Nilda, why don't you go first, please? Identify yourself and proceed.
Good afternoon, honorable council members. My name is Nilda Ruiz, and I'm the president and CEO of Asociación Puertorriqueños en Marcha, better known as APM. I'm before you today in support of the bill 170678, which supports the creation of mixed income housing program to provide affordable housing standards that are so needed in the Philadelphia area. And I only have 3 minutes, so I'm the only issue with the program is just that it's limited to Center City, and you've heard it in the testimonies over and over that gentrification is spilling out into our communities, and it is a concern. Previous to this, we only had the zoning board as an outlet for the community to speak. We've been very fortunate with the RCOs that the community has been coming out and has been speaking out, but it is something that is very much needed in our neighborhoods as well. We're living proof that this can work. We are a developer, a nonprofit developer, and as you all know, we partnered with Jonathan Rose a few years, 3 years ago, and we built Paseo Verde at 9th and Berks, which is a transit-oriented development. In there, we were able to do 53 affordable units and 67 market rate, and we have set aside for 60%, 40% median income, and on the market side, we have 17 units set aside for 80% of median. So we do know that it can be done. The profit margins probably are not as large as some might expect, but we've been 100% occupied ever since we have opened it. The community, by talking to the community, we were able to also do a federally qualified health center there, and we also have a pharmacy, and then our community umbrella agency, which serves children and families in that area. A more equitable Philadelphia where all people can have the opportunity to succeed and achieve through good mixed income housing policy is very much needed. The alternative to put some of these fees in lieu of building into the trust fund, we think is a good idea, and we strongly support it with the caveat that we would like it to expand out into our communities. And Councilwoman, I did hear you about that you started Center City, but it is coming into our communities really quickly. We're just a little bit above, right there at 9th and Berks in that area, and we see developers all the time asking for 12-story buildings. The same thing that the group before us with the little notes, we'll buy your homes, and constantly we have to talk to the community. Don't let go of your homes. And these people have taken a stake there for a really long time, and we would like to preserve that.
Thank you. Thank you. Please, identify yourself.
Good afternoon, members of City Council.
I am Lisa Rivera, the Development and Communications Coordinator for USEF. I am here today to provide testimony regarding the great work performed by the Housing Trust Fund in its partnership with USEF and to show our support for the Mixed Income Housing Program. We feel as an organization that this bill will not only help us find affordable housing for the clients that we serve, but will make a significant impact on many communities and organizations throughout Philadelphia. During fiscal year 2017, we received funding from the Housing Trust Fund for a utility grant program. As a result, USEF was able to stop utility service shutoffs and restore utility services for over 2,100 vulnerable families. The lack of needed utility service is one of the leading causes of homelessness. For example, when the gas and electricity are shut off, this results in no heat, no lights, and no refrigeration, which then causes many families to abandon their homes and ultimately end up at the shelter door. The families who benefited from these funds had an average annual income of $13,100. The Housing Trust Fund has also attracted other leveraged funds to our organization of nearly $1.2 million. The funds were leveraged through matching utility bill credits, other direct private funding, direct benefit acquisitions such as Earned Income Tax Credit, SNAP, and many others. In addition, USEF provided Housing Trust Fund's utility assistance as part of an overall housing stabilization approach, leveraging resources from other USEF programs, such as our work with TANF families and veterans. USEF has also worked in partnership with the Office of Homeless Services to serve 100 families in our Shelter to Permanent Housing program. USEF utilized housing trust funds to provide utility assistance to those in shelter who had high utility arrearages, which would result in the denial of obtaining new utility services when moving into permanent housing. Through this program, the family's primary barrier to leaving the shelter was removed. The city saved up to $30,000 per family in shelter costs, and valuable shelter space was freed up. In conclusion, before I transitioned into this position as Development and Communications Coordinator, I was the housing specialist for the Veterans Housing Program at USEF. As my primary role, I work side by side with the homeless veterans to help them find permanent affordable housing in Philadelphia. With most of them having low income and/or fixed income, it was a challenge to find them affordable housing in safe areas. Most of the stabilized housing, subsidized housing that we came across and applied for had long waiting lists for up to 3 years, and a lot of the housing that our clients could afford were unsafe, inhabitable environments. This bill has a chance to change hopeless options into greater opportunities for many individuals and communities throughout Philadelphia. USEF stands firm in support to affordable homes for a growing Philly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Can I ask you two to move back and let the other three sit at the table, please? No, we got another group. How many of them are still left? I don't think it's too many. So whoever would like to go first, please. Identify yourself and proceed.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Fleischer-Selden, and I'm the Executive Director of Rebuilding Together Philadelphia. Good afternoon, Chairman Greenlee and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of the Mixed Income Housing Bill. I will abbreviate my spoken remarks and ask that my written remarks are considered by the committee. As all of you know, Rebuilding Together Philadelphia provides free, safe, and healthy home repairs to low-income homeowners through 2 primary programs, Block Builds and our VOTEC in the House program. Block Builds utilize between 100 and 300 volunteers, neighbors, and homeowners to repair 10 to 30 clustered homes over several days. All of the members of the committee or their staffs have been out to Block Builds, and you have seen in person what it has done for the neighborhoods and for the homeowners involved. With 3 block builds each year, Rebuilding Together repairs 75 homes. What you might not know about is our VOTEC in the House program, which is a new program this year. It allows vocational students to put their classroom skills to work to repair homes for seniors. Throughout the year, students provide essential plumbing, electrical, masonry, and carpentry repairs that they have learned in their construction curriculum. These students get actual work-based experience, workplace-based experience, putting their vocational skills that they learn in the classroom to work in the homes. Every year, VOTEC in the House serves 25 seniors. Since 1988, Rebuilding Together has repaired 1,523 homes. Payments in lieu to the Housing Trust Fund will serve not only very low-income people who need critical repairs like the ones we serve, but also homeless Philadelphians who can move into new affordable homes. With additional support from the Housing Trust Fund, Rebuilding Together could expand our VOTEC in the House program and assist more low-income seniors and give more vocational high school students the opportunity for a workplace-based experience. According to the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging, Philadelphia is home to 282,000 people aged 60 or older, and 70% own their own homes. 2/3 of those homeowners say it is difficult to afford maintenance and repairs. And by maintenance and repairs, I mean heating, plumbing, and roofs. Before you are pictures from 63-year-old Ruby Beckett's home. Ruby Beckett lived in her home in Mantua for 34 years and raised 3 children there. For years, she needed a new roof and couldn't afford it. Miss Beckett put patches on it. She hired contractors by taking out a loan, but their work was shoddy, and the water damage eventually caused homes and rooms after rooms. Just 2 of those rooms are shown in the pictures in your attachments. Rebuilding Together restored the roof. Our volunteers fixed the holes in the kitchen and the bedroom caused by the roof leak. RTP urges support of the mixed income housing bill to allow homeless Philadelphians to rent their first homes so lower income Philadelphians can purchase a home of their own, and to ensure homeowners like Ruby Beckett that they have the resources to maintain their homes.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we move to the other two, we're going to ask Ms. Marconi to call the names of who we have left here. I want to see who's still here.
Jeff Braff,
Okay?
Chuck Bodie,
Okay?
Madeline Shakumba,
I saw her. Okay.
Maria Ortiz,
Is that over there? Did I see a hand? Okay.
Roseanne Loesch,
No? Okay.
Matt Rubin,
No? Okay.
Joe Schiavo,
Right there?
Judy Applebaum,
No? Okay. Is there anyone else other than those names that got called that want to testify? No, I know these two. I just was asking anybody. Okay, that'll be it. That'll be the names, okay? Please. Identify yourself and proceed.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Sarah
A
Young.
little closer microphone. Yeah, there you go.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Young. I'm the Director of Planning for Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation, PCDC. We're a CDC which has served the Chinatown community for 51 years. When people talk about Philadelphia, they typically talk about Center City and the neighborhoods. Chinatown is a neighborhood in Center City. And as one of the only neighborhoods left in the downtown area that has a significant low-income neighborhood, we're currently experiencing this crisis and we have been on the front line of these changes for some time. Chinatown is a neighborhood of opportunity which welcomes and nurtures low-income immigrants, which are among the most vulnerable and underserved populations in the city. Affordable housing is our lifeblood. Our recently completed neighborhood plan concluded that affordable housing is needed to preserve the mixed income nature of the community. The plan found that in the past 15 years, half of the population, which makes between 50 to 100% AMI, which constitutes the low-income and moderate population of our community, has moved out of Chinatown. The plan also finds that in contrast to 15 years ago, the majority of our workers no longer live in Chinatown, but in other Philadelphia neighborhoods. Unfortunately, the bill as it is currently written will worsen the affordable housing crisis in Chinatown and other mixed-income communities which are experiencing market pressure and displacement of our low-income populations. This is because if developers opt to pay the in-lieu fees to the Housing Trust Fund, the community will bear the weight of high-density market rate development that does not have any affordable units in it. A small percentage of in-lieu fees, which would be funneled through the Housing Trust Fund's normal process, would not offset the impact of this development for Chinatown. We strongly urge that changes be made to the bill in order to ensure positive impacts on mixed-income neighborhoods, which the purpose of this bill is to create. We believe that these should include, number one, allowing height restrictions and zoning overlays to supersede the density bonus. And number two, ensuring funds or affordable units that are generated by the development in mixed-income neighborhoods stay in these communities. Places like Chinatown, Francisville, Point Breeze, and other neighborhoods are in Center City, and we are losing our low-income residents. We need to enable communities like these to benefit from additional development. Otherwise, we will continue to place obstacles which prevent people of color from living in neighborhoods with good jobs, schools, and transit access. In the process of creating a bill which will serve low-income Philadelphians, we ask you not to destroy what you're currently seeking to make. Chinatown is a neighborhood of opportunity which welcomes and nurtures low-income people, and we're asking for your help to keep it that way.
3 minutes.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, that's 3 minutes. Okay. Thank you, Ben. Please. No, it's 3 minutes. It's 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Jampel, and I am a legal fellow at Regional Housing Legal Services. We are a local nonprofit that represents nonprofit developers of affordable housing and that advocates for more equitable housing policies. We support a strong mixed-income housing bill. As you know, tens and tens of thousands of the city's families do not have access to safe and dignified affordable housing. We believe that the City Council should act to address this tremendous need, and we applaud the efforts of those who have worked to move this bill forward. At its best, an inclusionary zoning policy can accomplish two goals. It can expand the overall supply of affordable housing, and it can create and preserve mixed-income communities. The current amendments, however, compromise the bill's ability to achieve this second goal. I'd like to explain why this matters and the issues with the current amendments. There are multiple reasons why creating and preserving mixed-income communities is an important goal. Research indicates that diverse neighborhoods can lead to greater tolerance and open-mindedness. Furthermore, such an effort is needed to address the legacy of discriminatory policies that has contributed to the housing inequality and segregation we have today. Recent research by Raj Chetty, an economist now at Stanford, convincingly demonstrates that neighborhoods matter for low-income families, especially those with younger children. It shows that an affordable unit in a higher-income neighborhood offers promise and opportunities to families that a unit in a lower-income area does not. In a rigorous analysis, Chetty studied the outcomes of low-income families living in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty who randomly received housing vouchers to move to higher-income neighborhoods. He found that younger children whose families received the vouchers experienced a variety of positive outcomes. They earned 35% more in adulthood, were 32% more likely to attend college, and were more likely to raise their own children in improved neighborhood and family environments. Chetty found on these specific economic metrics that older children had slightly negative outcomes and that adults did not have improvements. Past research, however, has shown positive impacts to older children in the areas of crime and problem behaviors and to adults in terms of their mental health and subjective well-being. We are concerned that with the amendments, the current bill may result in few, if any, units being created in high-opportunity neighborhoods. The current bill allows developers to completely opt out of building units by paying the in lieu fee. If this fee is not appropriately set, developers may choose to pay into the Housing Trust Fund every single time. The amended bill also exempts many of the city's higher-income neighborhoods, thus reducing the number of units that could be built. Finally, the bill makes it more difficult for builders to build off-site units within the same neighborhood. These units would provide most of the same benefits as on-site ones. We are excited about the bill and its potential to help address the severe need for affordable housing in Philadelphia. As the bill moves forward, we hope that the way that neighborhoods matter for affordable housing will be fully considered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all very much. There's no questions? Thank you. Thank you for your patience and hanging in there. So, Ms. Marconi, why don't you call the names of all the people who said they were here, they can come up.
Jeff
That'll be our last group.
Jeff Braff, Chuck Brody, Madeline Jacumba, Maria Ortiz, Joe Schiavo, and Judy Applebaum.
Okay. The ones that can't get at the table, please just sit in the black chairs here so we can conclude our hearing.
Speak, please.
All right. And again, for those who might have come in later, everybody has 3 minutes. And if you have written testimony, you can submit it and it will be, the entire testimony will be made part of the record. Who would like to go first? Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Braff with Center City Residents Association. We are a resident association and an RCO consisting of approximately 1,000 households, dues-paying households. CCRA has been following this issue since the bill was first introduced back in June. However, CCRA cannot take a position on the merits of the amended bill. CCRA is in favor of the concept of affordable housing, but the devil is in the details. We agree with Councilwoman Sanchez that you cannot legislate the perfect for everyone. But as is appropriate from the questions that have been raised this morning and here this afternoon, this is complicated stuff. And it's very important that we avoid unintended consequences. The amended bill was distributed at 5:08 p.m. on Monday, last Monday, just 2 business days before the Thanksgiving holiday. We're not the U.S. Congress here dealing with Obamacare or taxes. What's the rush to push this out of committee today? We ask that the bill be held, that it be given further consideration, that all the questions that have been raised this morning and this afternoon be given a chance to be heard, and that the civic associations have an opportunity to consider the bill as amended, given some time so our membership can consider it. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Good afternoon. My name is Chuck Bodie. I'm with the West Powelton Saunders Park RCO. The West Powelton Saunders Park RCO urges the Rules Committee to hold Bill 170678 for further review. There are several issues that need further study. First, we are concerned that this bill will cause the destruction of more homes in our neighborhood. We fear that instead of large project in RCMX4 zoning, developers will avoid providing affordable housing by requesting more under 10-unit multifamily variances in areas zoned for single family. Second, we are concerned with the number of bonuses offered. Already, developers try to pile on bonuses for grocery stores and green roofs to create buildings far exceeding the expected size for zoning classifications in our neighborhood. Do they now combine another bonus? There needs to be a limit on the maximum that can be built in each zoning classification. And third, we are concerned with the number of uncoordinated changes to the zoning code. Bill 170672 increases the parking requirements for residential projects with 10 or more units. We recently had an extended discussion with a developer to understand why on-site parking would cost $70,000 per space in his proposed apartment building. The total impact of affordable units and parking could result in quality apartments being built only in the suburban counties. Bill 170678 may cause unintended consequences that reduce instead of increasing affordable housing. We urge further study. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sukumba?
Yes, Madeline Chacomba, I represent the North of Washington Avenue Coalition. Our area is one of the areas that are going to be heavily impacted. I'm in Councilman Johnson's area, which is called the Graduates area, and I support the idea of mixed housing. I have no doubt with that. That's fine. But this bill needs to be held up for a while so we make some clarification. One of them is, who is this department you keep talking about that's going to handle this? You don't name it. Does this department will have some executive authority? Some legislative authority? Will you have the ability to appeal? Nothing is said. It just said, the department. Okay? Second thing is, we'd like for you to remove the RM4 classification. There's no need for that to be in there. If you're going to have CMX and so forth, remove the RMX4. Thirdly, the penalty. The penalty is atrocious. It's, you lose your vacancy certificate, or $500 a day. It takes 400 days to get up to $200,000. Is that a penalty? I think the penalty should be stronger than that because these developers are going to try to wiggle their way out of providing what they're being asked to provide. And you're giving them all the access to do so. Okay? Thirdly, it's affecting me as existing homeowners. We have no say-so in these people building these buildings. You're going to let them go to 5, 6, 7 feet if they do greenery, if they do groceries and all this kind of stuff. What about my house? Not that he's going to build next to my house, but I'm thinking about other people who live near these sites that you're giving them to do. They can block their sunlight. They can put up all kind of obstacles in their way. And these people have nothing to say about it because you're doing it without any input from the existing homeowners. Not only that, but you're pushing us out of our homes. They're going to come in there with these high-rise, high-impact houses, because 9 out of 10 of them are going to be high-rise and high-impact, that one little old unit for affordable housing. Now, you tell me what impact it's going to have on me. Yes, it's going to increase my assessments, increase my real estate taxes, and I ain't going to have no say-so. You need to put something in there that's going to protect the existing homeowners, and you don't even have that. You didn't even address us in this thing. We wanted the anomalies, abnormalities, I guess, that don't exist, and said if you wanted to look at us and say, oh, yeah, you're there. So we'd like for you to do that, okay? And also, why don't you use some of these foreclosed properties? I think Mr. Don was pointing out about half a dozen properties that's up for foreclosure, Academy House and so forth. Why don't the city go into them? Take them over from the bank. The bank kept talking about they needed money and that they couldn't afford to, how you say, what was the term he used? To give it to, we weren't viable enough. But these businesses were viable enough, and they foreclosed. So use some of these businesses, the Academy House and the rest of them, to have affordable housing in there. They're available. The bank done foreclosed on them, and they ain't found a buyer yet. So therefore, use some of them. Do not put too much on us as homeowners. We're tired of this, okay? We need relief too. And you're not giving us any kind of relief, okay? And,
All right, I have to, that's your 3 minutes, okay?
All right.
We're trying to give everybody 3 minutes here. All right, Ms.
I had more to say,
yeah.
but I'll hold it off.
Okay, yeah. If you have anything written you want to submit, please do
No,
it.
I came here because I didn't get the bill until late.
Okay.
So the
Ms.
amendment,
Ortiz,
I don't know
please.
what to do.
Okay.
My name is Marie Ortiz. I'm a mother.
A little closer, Mike, okay?
My name is Marie Ortiz. I'm a mother, grandmother, and I'm in a program called Grandparent Raising Grandkids. And I'm also with the Concerned Citizen in my neighborhood. Recently, I heard about this meeting, which I heard this morning. I would have my speech prepared. But I'm devastated because in my area, we don't have affordable housing. I pay balloon taxes. I don't get a loop, and I don't get homestead. I think that's very unfair. But these developers can come in and destroy property. And I'm a prime example where my property got destroyed. If I don't fix it with this bill, you're telling me I'll be out of a home, I'll be homeless, I'll be in the street. I have children that's college graduate that live within the area. Most of the income in this area is from $10,000 to $20,000. And this is with no health insurance or no coverage, and I'm in that category. I don't have health benefit and I don't have coverage. I feel like I've been lost. You go to your council people and you explain different things. You explain the damages these developers are doing to these homes. Now I just heard they're going to do 5-story with rooftop decks in my neighborhood. That is not fair. And with this, all this building they're doing, they're damaging people's property, which at a cost us seniors to fix it. And sometimes we had to pick and choose, even working class family and low income family, do I pay my rent, do I get it fixed, or my medicine? This is a challenging situation. You need to sit down again and revise this bill for people of working low income. Affordable housing is a necessity. We need this. This is something that the community in every area needs, affordable housing. Without this affordable housing, we're doomed. We're destined. But yet we're good enough to come and clean your home. We're good enough to wash your clothes. We're good enough to do all the entities in a home, but we're not good enough for the support of the affordable housing. And I think that's a shame. As a city of Philadelphia, you call yourself brotherly love. Where's the brotherly love for the seniors and the people that's living in the street? or the families that can't get back to their parents that live across in another state, or over, I got enough that lives in Japan. He can't even get here because the fee is so, the fee of an airplane ride is so much money to go back and forth, and he teaches there. Well, I think you really need to sit down and really think about this plan and you put it into place. We need affordable housing, not more high-end housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chavo, please, into the microphone.
Good afternoon, Chairman Greenlee and members of the committee. I applaud Councilwoman Sanchez.
A little closer microphone, please, so we can.
I applaud Councilwoman Sanchez and co-sponsors' initiatives under this bill. I hope that Council and the administration can work out a comprehensive, fair, affordable housing plan. My point is a small point, and it may be that there are unintended consequences currently embedded in the bill. And as an example, I'll just point out that in the Old City residential district, where there are height controls, a 65-foot height control, and it's directly adjacent to the Independent Hall area where there are specific height controls. This area is known as America's most historic square mile. The height controls are there in order to protect the historic fabric that has been there for so long and we treasure, and that's why we are attempting to protect the character of that district. The intended FAR increases incorporated in the bill then push this district, which is primarily a CMX district with a base FAR of 500, pushes it up against the height limits that exist there for cause. And so I ask that you consider carefully whether such districts should be carved out of the bill. Now, I'll point out that the two projects that were cited earlier that have taken advantage of the mixed income housing height bonus incorporated in the new code are both in Old City, but they happen to be in an area of Old City not covered by the 65-foot height limit. So you see, it's subtle. And there are particulars that I think need to be studied, and they might be able to be amended, that is, the bill amended in such a way that it accommodates the purpose of the height limits currently in place. I hope that we get more affordable housing in Old City. I'm glad that the first units that were built in Old City, and I applaud that. But I'm asking that we study this carefully to make sure that the unintended consequences don't do harm to the standards of height limits that are in place for cause. Thank you.
Okay, with nobody else to testify, thank you. That completes our public hearing of the Rules Committee, and we will momentarily go into a public meeting. Let's see where we are here. Where's Blundell? All right, thank you. We are now, we completed the public hearing, which I mentioned included almost 5 hours of testimony, just for the record. We completed that and completed the public part of that. We are now into a public meeting, and the chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we table this piece of legislation to the date certain, Tuesday, December 5th at 10 a.m.
Continue, I think it's
Continue.
best. Yeah, we're not tabling, continue. Okay, and it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Bill number, what's our bill number? 170678. The public meeting of that bill has been continued until Tuesday, December 5th at 10 o'clock to an already scheduled Rules Committee hearing. But this will just be the meeting on that bill. Thank you very much.